That is a cover sheet from a CIA secret file drawer. It's the kind of thing you see, unfortunately, applied far too often to this subject. We're going to get rid of that cover sheet and go into a depth that goes, frankly, beyond a lot of what military and intelligence understand about the subject. Next slide, please. That is just a brief organizational chart of the intelligence apparatus, part of it in the United States. There's more on there that is so classified that it isn't even allowed to be acknowledged to be part of the government, but it is. The next slide, please. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the military intelligence defense UFO cover-up complex. You will notice elements like the National Security Agency, or areas you perhaps have not heard about, Star Wars City in Colorado Springs, where the complex of bases where they conduct control of the United States Space War Command. The organization is prepared to conduct a full-scale space war at any moment. And we're not talking about Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles. Elements like Rockwell, Martin Marietta, and Lockheed, Boeing, and some of the other defense contractors, and ones you may not be quite as familiar with, Rockefeller Company, and some of the other folks at the trough. Okay, next slide. This is a photograph of a low-level UFO, can't be more than 300 feet, probably a lot lower, above the jungle floor in Matamoros near the Mexico-U.S. border. People say there's no clear daytime photos close-up of structured metallic craft. I would beg to differ. This is a blow-up of that. Next slide, please. It's flying upside down there. That's a failure of the slide, not of navigation. This is the right side up version of that. And next slide, please. People say, when are they going to land on the White House lawn? Well, the visitors have many forms of communication, and I think it's a statement of their mental elegance and respect for our intelligence that they engage in quiet dialogue in various kinds. Crop circles, the genuine ones, represent such an effort at communication. This rather complex one, showing the Devil Helix strain, is actually made up of, I believe, close to 71 individual circles woven in a pattern. This appeared overnight in a grain field in UK, and I can assure you, Doug and Dave had nothing to do with it. The next slide, please. An even more intricate communication method, suggesting that we understand the chaos theory, and the people who know chaos theory know about the Mandelbrot set, the rather pattern of uniformity and organization at the edge of apparent chaotic edges of matter when you render it under a microscope at a high enough magnification level. First looks chaotic, and then you start to see patterns of organization with it, and below the Mandelbrot set is the Julia set. It's interesting that in the swirls of chaos, organization appears signs of intelligence at the very subatomic most level of matter. Thank you. Next. This figurine is from a very old civilization. 9,000 BC, the glaciers receded from northern Europe and Turkey, and as they receded with the last of the late Ice Age, cultures sprung up, including in northern Turkey, where 35 underground cities emerged, the most famous being Derienku. These cities house as many as 20,000 inhabitants. You wonder where people who had just emerged wandering from the ice ages suddenly sprung up into fully developed cities with multi-storied apartments, houses for dwellings, all of a sudden. The figurine you see before you is found in the graves of the inhabitants of the city. No self-respecting citizen would go to their grave without making sure such a figure appeared in the grave with them. Why were they so concerned for having this figure accompanying them to the journey to the next world? Well, next slide, please. I believe it is because one of the visiting star races, not too accurately drawn by the picture of the figure at the upper left there, the scales are far too large there. They should be very fine scales, such as you could hardly see, sort of like the fine scaling on the belly of a chenolian or a snake. This is one of the races that made contact with Earth and helped primitive humankind develop in a very short order high elements of civilization, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, and knowledge of spirituality, and knowledge of origin of life from the stars. What you see before you here is David Chase, a talented artist in Washington State. He tried to depict the various kinds of races that people who've had encounters have described to him. He, of course, is working with the handicap of not having actually seen these individuals himself, but depending on people's descriptions and trying to do the best job possible of drawing them as accurately as possible. You will see in this assemblage some fairly familiar figures, some of the Zeta Reticulans folks, so-called grays, although they come in many skin colors and many eye configurations, actually. Some very human-looking folks that you put a pair of sunglasses on them, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them from somebody else walking down the street. And other figures who look quite different from us. The short gray dwarf types, the wrinkled skin, the reptilian type I mentioned, humanoid. Not depicted there as a praying mantis type, insectoid, humanoid, very spiritual and ethereal species, and so forth, many others. These are just some of the more common visitors to people, is my estimation from working with over 400 experiencers, that there are perhaps 100 races in contact with Earth. I draw my information from not only my own work, but working with hundreds of other therapists who work with people who've had encounters, and other researchers such as Dr. Leo Sprinkle, retired psychology professor from the University of Wyoming, Dr. John Mack, active psychiatry professor at Harvard University, etc. Thank you. I believe that's the end of the visuals. Afterwards, if you would like to see additional depictions of some of the visitors, including a couple of actual photos, I'd be happy to share them. I just don't happen to have them in PowerPoint format at this point in time. My apologies for that. I'm going to give you a presentation that will hopefully not insult your intelligence, and will assume that many of the people here have done a lot of background self-education, reading, and attending lectures. I'm not going to waste a minute of your time trying to prove UFO reality. In my view, anybody who doesn't understand UFO reality doesn't have an operating TV set. There have been far too many documentaries presented on the subject. I'm not even going to spend a huge amount of time on the star visitors. because other speakers have and will over the next day make various presentations on that subject. I will tell you that there is a great deal of disinformation and misinformation on the subject being put out in the popular UFO press and on the media. In my research experience and that of the behavioral science professionals that I work with, the vast majority of those visiting here are interested in our best welfare, and tales of abusive invaders are largely the work of science fiction. I like to tell the story that if I were in a dark alley late at night and walking down there and there was a figure approaching from the other end of the dark alley, I would much prefer it to be a star visitor than a human. My odds of keeping my hide in one piece would be much better. What is going on now is another iteration of the unfoldment of contact of the visitors with us. I'm going to give you shared email communication back and forth between myself and the mother of a star kid, and then I'm going to use that as a springboard to give you an historical perspective on what's been going on with the human race. And then we're going to jump back forward to the immediate now and the very near future as we look with some detail at the next iteration of human evolution, human advancement forward. It's not really evolution. As Dr. Lear suggested, it's aided by some genetic engineering. We are on the dawn of amazing times as we become a cosmic society. There is a sleeping phenomenon among us that you hardly ever hear about in the media, but you will be hearing more and more about. Let me just share this letter from a mother of a star kid. She talks as follows. My daughter will be 18 next month. I've never doubted her exceptional qualities. I've never found anyone else who is like her. She keeps a low profile on these matters. I think as she moves into adulthood, she will be working with other star children. I won't go into great length about why I feel she's a star child at this point, but let me just give you a hint or two of who she is. She was talking at 4 months of age, conducting fluent conversation by age 2, reading by age 1, seeming to be an old soul in a baby's body. Even at her birth, there were interesting dynamics. Her crib was covered by a beam of light in the nursery. And let me have a young woman, starseed, tell you something she wrote me about herself. I had written on the internet the various qualities I noticed in these kids, and she wrote back, I have all the powers you mentioned, some more strongly than others. Some I don't have control over. I seem to have the least control of telekinesis, the ability to move an object by focused mental effort. It seems to occur at random and when I am upset, and can occur at a pretty good distance from me. Before I knew I had the power, I did some damage. Got angry once at a business some years ago, dreamed about it burning down, and later it did. I can sometimes not be seen by people. I am still visible, I just have a way of not being noticed if I don't want to, mental influencing of others. I have not levitated to my awareness since I was an infant. She's apologizing for not levitating anymore, but she used to. And then she goes on to say how that was found out. I was found on the floor beside my crib with no obvious way out. I was too big to get through the bars and too young at 8 weeks old to climb out of a standard baby bed. So my dad pretended to be asleep one night to see how I was getting out. He claims he saw me float out in my sleep from the crib, turn over in the air, and the turning over would wake me up, and then I would fall with a bang to the floor and start crying, which is how they've been finding me night after night for weeks after hearing the thud when I hit the floor. I wish I could still do that, but I can't turn those psychotronic twirler things you make out of paper and stuff. What she's talking about there is a kind of very thin paper pinwheel suspended on a fine pin with a bell jar put over it so that not a whisper of air can get at the apparatus. Some of you may have seen a video or documentary that made the rounds on some television called Russian Psychics, which actually showed this on film, another person doing the same thing. The person sits there and focuses at the little paper pinwheel captured inside the glass dome, and after a while it starts to spin by pure mental effort. This star seed goes on to say, I can feel other people's emotions. I can see into gift packages, so my husband made a great game of wrapping gifts for me. He has learned the one way to beat me is to disassemble things and wrap them separately. That way she can't see what she's getting for Christmas. I use dowsing. I can see auras and I can read them. I do psychic health readings. I have an IQ off the scale, which makes people so mad at me that to keep friends I try so hard to pretend to be dumber than I am. But that gets to be a strain after a while. Remote viewing, that's the ability to sit here and see what's going on somewhere else at a distance, is and has always been a parent-child's play to me. I'm a physical empath, feel others. I can do mental influencing. I used to make people get off the freeway to go to the bathroom just to clear traffic when I was young. I would look at the back of their heads, imagine what it was like to really have to go bad to the bathroom, and beam this feeling at the back of their heads, and sure enough, they would get off the freeway. Try and find the nearest bathroom, I presume. I can sense storms, and I can sometimes ride them. Out-of-body traveling is a random thing I don't have much control over. I get psychic answers to tests. By that she means she just knows the answer without studying the subject. This drives parents crazy when their kids do this. And I know a lot of subjects I've never studied. I can heal others, but I have a poor track record with self-healing. I have the psychic scent. I can track people like a bloodhound. I can smell things like death. Once I smelled death when a man was having a heart attack across the street from my house. I can't define what it smells like. I study synesthesia in search of things, the answers to these things. I don't think I've ever put out streetlights. I mention that because one of the things I've listed in the categories I've noticed with experiencers and starseeds are kids, especially those amber sodium vapor street lamps that are around kind of a yellowish orangish with a glowing inside gas inside. One of the things I've noticed with the starseed is that when they go by, they will sometimes go out. Not every time, but way more than random. And it appears that what's happening is the bioelectric field around these star folks has been so amped up that it swamps the plasma field that keeps these lamps going, and they collapse, and there's nothing left but the little tiny filament wire glowing, but the big glowing gas field has collapsed, and therefore it looks like the streetlight has gone out. She goes on to say, I can bring nearly dead plants back to life. I can calm down storms so they're not so damaging. I have an extra vertebra, lower than normal body temperature. By that she's talking about one of the characteristics I've noted in this population, that their body temperature is a degree or two below the average. You'll have to forgive me, I'll give you the Fahrenheit, you can do your own centigrade conversions. In the Fahrenheit world, 98.6 is considered the average human body temperature. That's what they set fever thermometers to tell you you're normal. Most of the star kids and star seeds are below 97.6. Some of us have readings like 96.8 instead of 98.6. I have all kinds of advanced ideas that no one will ever listen to. People like us could make a wonderful difference if society would just let us. We know ways to create a utopian society, ways to make a machine that can heal and reverse aging. But the way things are in this society, I'm just a crackpot. I've learned to use a computer as a remote viewing amplifier only recently. And so those are some of the things she wished to share in her letter to me. These are amazing abilities. In the general human population, there's a vague awareness that once in a while you run across a human being who's psychic, meaning maybe they have a very good intuitive sense of what somebody else is thinking. Or perhaps they can see the future. But to have 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 of these abilities, that is unheard of. And yet with these star kids and star seeds, that is what is happening. How did this come to be? To put this in proper context, let me give you a very brief journey, a revised history of the human race. 350,000 years ago, approximately, Homo sapiens emerged all of a sudden without any direct ancestors. We know that the archaeologists speak about Lucy and some of the other primitive primate skeletal remains discovered in Africa. But these do not bear a direct resemblance to modern humans who suddenly emerged. Even Neanderthal, the closest species to ourselves, has been studied through DNA testing and found out to be not an ancestor of humans. And they were, of course, much more primitive. We do not have that caved-in, sloping skull front. We have a bulging forward forehead. We know that the location of intelligence and ESP, higher mental abilities, is in the forefront of the head. All of a sudden we emerge as a species with those characteristics. How did this happen? Well, we don't have to guess. It turns out there are multiple sources of information to answer this question. All the indigenous peoples of the world, the Native Americans in North, Central, and South America, the Aborigines here in Australia, the Maori in New Zealand, Aotearoa, the Dogon in Africa, the Dropa in China, all the indigenous people who have an unbroken record of memory of their oral history back to the beginning tell the same general story of origin due to people from the stars. Besides these handed down oral histories, the first written history in Sumeria, modern Iraq, going back some 6,000-7,000 years, was decoded by Zecharia Sitchin, whom some of you have read his books. These people, among other things in their ancient chronicles, told of their origin, that they were visited by people from the stars who taught them astronomy, mathematics, medicine, architecture, crop rotation, the ability to tell planting seasons by when the sun and the moon are at certain positions in the sky, and of course written writing. Sumerian culture is the first example of writing in the human history. Where did they get these abilities? These are people before were wandering about, nomadic hunter-gatherers trying to find tonight's dinner on the prowl, and all of a sudden, and essentially overnight in archaeological terms, they settled down in a fertile valley, built not just buildings, but multi-storied cities, 2 and 3 stories high, with a crude but effective observatories, water works, all the trappings of civilization. Did they suddenly take a smart pill? Not exactly. They had visitors from the sky show them the elements of basic culture and civilization. On the other side of the world, the people in Mesoamerica, the Mayans and the Aztec, talk about sky visitors whom they call Quetzalcoatl and Cochabamba, who came down and showed them the same elements of civilization, and all of a sudden we see emerging from the jungles multi-story cities and giant pyramids and observatories. And again, civilizations essentially blossoming overnight. The star visitors didn't just genetically engineer Homo sapiens by taking primate stock and splicing some of their own genes in for intelligence and dexterity and greater cranial mass, brain case size. Over the millennia, they watched over our development to see how this species would turn out, because there's never been another planet Earth, and the primates that evolved here to a point that they were developed enough that with a little splicing it would make an intelligent species. We were built for the gravity of Earth and all that, but you never know with a given planet and a given evolutionary species, when you go in and splice for intelligence, what's going to happen, what they're going to do with that intelligence, how they're going to evolve, how they're going to culturally evolve. And so over the millennia, they watched our development. And we moved forward as a species, but there were still certain limitations. And so as they saw that too much of the aggressiveness of the animal side of our makeup still showed through, we settled arguments by putting a stone axe in the other guy's forehead. They decided to send teachers among us to help us raise our cultural, spiritual, mental development. A Lakota Sioux medicine man, teacher, elder of the Sioux Nation, looks for buffalo, made a very striking statement at a gathering in the plains of North America several years ago. This gentleman shared some of the very most closely guarded information handed down among the Sioux Nation from the beginning of their culture. And one of the things that he said that was striking is that all the avatars were star men. Those great teachers who gave us our religious history. Lao Tse started Taoism. Zoroaster, the beginning of Zoroastrianism in the Middle East. Moses in the Middle East again. Jesus, Buddha, and of course among the Native Americans, white buffalo calf woman, that woman from the Pleiades star system who gave them their teachings and culture. Quetzalcoatl, I've already mentioned. And at each point in history, as we unfolded, there was an attempt to upgrade our consciousness, our culture, our ethics, our spiritual understanding. Because the star visitors understand very much among their own civilizations and would have it to be true among us, that what is highest and best in us is not our technological mastery, it is not our physical strength or beauty, but it is that which is inside of us, our mental development, our soul, our spiritual development that is uppermost in importance. And so they've made some efforts over the decades to inspire teachers to come among us and point out that those are the most important elements of what makes us truly human, truly an intelligent species. Let's fast forward to the modern times. We are now past the nuclear era. The development of nuclear weapons is sort of a benchmark in technological development. When nuclear bombs were set off in the New Mexico desert and then later on used to annihilate a couple of cities, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, this was not just a human event. This had repercussions across the cosmos. I do not say that by hypothesis. Various visiting races have made that statement. They care about our development not only because we are an intelligent species and they share a kinship with us, but because of what we do with our development as a species has reverberations across the cosmos because we are all linked. Just like the more sophisticated among us recognize our linkage with each other as peoples, the better developed among us realize that it makes a difference to us whether people halfway around the globe are starving to death or blowing each other up. So it is in the cosmos. The network of the family of man, the network of consciousness that we share with other intelligent species, that enables us to telepathically reach across to each other, as some of the people in this room have done. The network of spirituality, of unfolding, of development, of intelligence as we march towards our path to source, the common consciousness matrix from which we come and to which we will eventually reunite as we reach our highest development. Any interruption in this, any deviation of it, is a concern. It is like the Three Musketeers, one for all and all for one. That is the law of the cosmos. No planet can be allowed to just do its thing. No intelligent species can be allowed to do its thing and it doesn't matter to the rest. We are all in the family of intelligent life. In the evolution of humankind, it is, I think, a fair thing to say that over the last 100 years, we have marched very far ahead technologically and in terms of material development, far ahead of our spiritual and mental development. We are lopsided as a people, as a race, and this has some dangerous implications. We have the technology not only to blow ourselves up by nuclear war, but also by our mastery of hydrocarbons, fossil fuel burning, and industrial production to damage the Earth's ecology to a point of no return. At the conference in Rio de Janeiro some close to 10 years ago, the scientists there said that the environment was degrading at a pace that if humankind did not turn it around, by 2025 it was their estimate that the environment would continue to spiral down in a way that could not be reversed. Because as we know from systems theory, each element of the environment is connected to every other element. And beyond a certain point, the cascading of collapsing systems would be beyond even our technology to reverse. So on several fronts, whether it is wars of genocide, nuclear weapons exchanges, or ecological meltdown, we are at some substantial risk of ending our stay on this planet as an intelligent species. On the other hand, we have extremely high potential, and the visiting races have made that very clear. If we rise to the highest and best within ourselves, we can do something that has not been done before in human history, and that is make an orderly and non-chaotic, non-catastrophic transition to a peaceable, just, ecologically sensitive, spiritually developed society that is fit and ready to navigate among the stars. I say this has not happened before in our history because the native elders tell us that 3 times previously humankind has reached this high level of technological development, but the spiritual and metaphysical development did not keep pace, and as a result humankind crashed and burned and went back down to the Stone Age. Some of the vestigial memories of these previous rising high and then collapsing we have as race memories with labels like Atlantis and Lemuria or Mu. There's also physical evidence to suggest these periods of high previous attainment. Glassified sand in areas in India and elsewhere suggest nuclear war because no other source can create that much glassified sand over that expanse of an area. There are archaeological digs where objects of high technological sophistication have been dug out of sedimentary layers that are too far deep to have any possible bearing with the modern technological society we know as humankind's highest achievement. The prophecies of the indigenous peoples, perhaps best summarized by the Hopi Indian prophecies that I'm aware of, talk about a fork in the road, and all the signs that humankind is at that fork in the road have now occurred, the preceding signs. And whether we go the high road towards meeting our highest and best potential as a species, or the low road back down to ecological or other race disaster as a people, is our choice, our karma, and our decision in this generation. We are the people that are going to be making that choice. All the indigenous agree that this is the time. And in addition to that voice, the star visitors also indicate that this is the time when humankind is either going to get it right or crash and burn again. It is in such a pregnant context, such a portentous context, that a new phenomenon arises among us, to which I will devote the rest of my time here today. The rise of star kids and star seeds among us. When I was a ordinary psychologist, seems a long time ago, in 1989 I had something happen that had never happened in 30 years of counseling people. That was the year people started for the first time to come in, and after we solved their problems, marriage difficulties, depression, whatever, they decided to let their hair down a little farther and tell me about an encounter they had with someone from the stars. I became intrigued by this because as a professional psychologist, I knew these people were not crazy. Many of them held very responsible positions in society. And I've been around long enough as a budding senior citizen to remember when Kenneth Arnolds, a pilot in Washington State, U.S. in 1947, first reported a squadron of UFOs over Mount Rainier, inaugurating the modern UFO reporting history. And 3 weeks later, I remember my parents talking about the story in the newspaper. July of 47, Army recovers disc crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. And as an 8th grader in 1952, I was old enough to read the papers for myself and see the front page headlines and photographs of formations of UFOs over the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. So I was well familiar with UFO reality before the cover-up started the next year in 53 and pained. They may have fooled several generations. They didn't fool the old-timers who knew about the reality of this before the media started being manipulated. So while I accepted UFO reality, it was another peg forward in understanding what's going on to hear these people talk about not only having seen a UFO, but they landed, people got out of them, came up to them, had communication, had interaction. As I worked, I became intrigued with these happenings and began to put the word out that I would be willing to hear people who had such experiences to share. And come in, they did. I've now worked with over 400 such individuals and counting. Over the 14 years since then that I've been working with these people, I've noticed yet another very extraordinary thing happening. These people who've been visited later on go on to have children, of course, but these children are not like regular children. They are highly advanced. Let me tell you some of the ways. They develop very early and rapidly. They have extraordinary abilities. Things like mental telepathy, knowing the future, moving objects mentally, seeing things at a distance in space or time, getting information downloaded into their consciousness, often during sleep, being able to communicate across species. Some of these star kids will tell a parent what the dog is or cat is thinking. And sure enough, it turns out to be accurate. My friend Joan Ocean, who swims with the dolphins almost every day in Hawaii on the Kona coast and has telepathic communication with them, comes back and has written some books and some videos about what the dolphins have to say to her. My friend Dr. Michael Wolf, consultant with the National Security Council, has revealed that the dolphins are a seeded extraterrestrial species. It's no accident why they have such large brains and intelligence. The whales also are another seeded extraterrestrial species. And these species have much to say. They've been around as long as we have on Earth. And Joan and others who communicate with them have messages to share. I hope you have Joan over here one time before long and hear the messages they have for us too. Other abilities these star kids and star seeds have: intuition, affecting electrical devices, not just street lights, but a kid will go by and a radio will change channels, or their field's so strong it will burn out a wristwatch. The ability to see across dimensions. Sometimes a person will see something out of the corner of their eye. Look at it directly, it's not there. Or a child will see a presence in the room that the parents cannot see. Being able to see others' auras, and furthermore to see patterns within them in the color or the shape or the design, which tells information that's useful about how the person is doing physically or emotionally. Being able to do psychic diagnosis, being able to read a person and tell where there may be something wrong, an injury, an illness, a beginning disease. And psychic healing, the ability to harness energy and send it into a person to make a positive difference in their health state. Teleportation, moving an object from one place to another by mental effort. Affecting time, for example, a trip that normally takes an hour driving, and it's very important to get there, and things are due to no fault, there's a late start. These people can fold time inward so that a trip that normally takes an hour only is accomplished in half an hour without speeding up the car. Pre-sensitivity to disasters like earthquakes or automobile accidents and letting people know so that harm could be minimized. Out-of-body travel. Serving as a conduit for off-world intelligences to come in and speak through the person and share communication. Having a sense of shared consciousness with a star visitor, the person is still there in their consciousness, but the star visitor is right alongside them in their head, as it were, and the person can share what that individual has to say. Being able to summon star visitors come in, either physically or fly overhead and signal their presence. These are some of the psychic ability these kids have. Other ways in which they're different, their immune systems often are much more developed. They hardly ever, after the first set of childhood diseases that kind of build up your immunity, they hardly ever have flus or real severe colds. If they have some kind of an episode of injury or cut, bone break, it heals very rapidly. These kids often have, from the childhood, a very adult gaze, a very mature demeanor, almost like an adult in a child's body. Some of you who are psychics may have noticed this too. I am struck by the number of children, even in strollers, babies, who instead of that kind of blah-blah, unfocused gaze you used to see in infants and strollers, many of these kids are focused. They're tracking their environment, they're locking on in eye contact and evaluating their environment with intelligence and awareness. I tried to pull a few of these kids out of the closet with mental telepathy, saying, "Welcome to Earth," and watching the kid look at me like, "Why are you talking inside my head? Nobody else around here does that." They're busted. These kids are intuitively spiritual. Often they will not be particularly church-going, but they have a natural spirituality that recognizes supreme source over consciousness, the underlying matrix of awareness and intelligence that shapes the universe is to be revered and honored.
How did you get involved with the subject of crop circles?
Incredibly enough, I was actually ironing a shirt in Chicago, where I lived at the time, and I was watching television, and the sound was turned off, so I didn't know what the newscast was about. But I remember seeing this incredible picture. It was shot of this design in a field, this bizarre-looking design in a field, a series of sort of straight lines and circles stuck together. And it never occurred to me that it could have been some kind of environmental art. And as an artist, I was well aware of this type of art. It never occurred to me that it would have been some bunch of people with some lawnmowers that went around a wheat field making this incredibly beautiful design. And I knew exactly what it was when I saw it. I couldn't verbalize it, and I couldn't put any logical sense to it, but I knew exactly what it was when I saw it, and it was at that moment that as part of me kind of woke up, as if it was a trigger, a subconscious trigger that helped me recognize what I was supposed to be doing here. And it might sound very strange, but on my travels, I've met other people who likewise have been involved in this phenomenon to a very deep degree. They have the exact identical story as well when they see a picture on a magazine, on a poster, and they said it's almost like something has just woken me up. It's a trigger, a message that I sent myself from a long time ago to remind me of what I'm supposed to be doing now. So it seems to be sort of part of that awakening process that the crop circles have built into their design, that they seem to be triggers for people to be activated at some conscious level. And that's how I got involved.
So you just went from that point, you just flew to England and started examining, researching the whole crop circle phenomena.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing it more remotely. I mean, I lived in America at the time, and I kept trying to find information about the circles, little snippets of information here and there, books, and started scouring esoteric books about information on symbols, because I knew I'd seen these things somewhere. They seemed very, very logical to me, like a well-known language. And by about 1994, I'd spent a lot of time going back to England on my summer holidays and spending more time there on the ground, actually doing personal experience observations and looking at the way the plants work, the way the soil was working, talking to eyewitnesses, talking to other people that had been studying this for a while. It just became a bit of a passion, which turned into an obsession, to the point where I decided that the best thing to do was just sell the house, leave the wife behind, and return to England full time. So it's been a bit of a sort of painful and very expensive process, but as I keep joking about it, the fringe benefits have been incredible, because the things that you've experienced and the things that you've seen in terms of natural phenomena, or what I describe now as natural phenomena, because they're very much part of our real world, much more so than we're led to believe through normal channels. The fringe benefits have been fantastic.
Okay, so you've had the same experience, say, as Colin Andrews. I mean, as he claims, he lost the country, right? He's lost his job,
Yeah.
He's lost his family. He lives in the United States now, but he feels that the fringe benefits, as you pointed out, outweigh the losses that he's had up to this point.
Very much so. I mean, it's a passion, because you sense that something is fundamentally right about what you're doing. It's a knowing that whatever it is that's involved in the crop circle mechanism is so fundamental to humanity as a message and as a mode of operation, that it's the kind of information that it brings with it. And I've seen people's lives be completely altered by their contact with the circles, spiritually much more so, that you feel a certain duty to represent what it is that the circle makes they're trying to get here. It's almost like you become an ambassador for the phenomenon, and a very open-minded one at that, because we're still learning through all of this. We don't know all the answers. But it takes you over. You get a sense of responsibility that it takes you over. And you can't help it. You have to follow that passion, because it overwhelms every facet of your life. Because suddenly, once you realize what's behind it, who's behind it, how it's created, you realize there's something far greater here than you, and that you almost become responsible to let people know what is going on. Whether they believe you or not is another matter, but at least as long as you put it in front of them and let them decide for themselves, that's the most important thing.
Right. So, in the 10 years or so that you've been following it, what are the signs? What do you see in it? I mean, what have you basically discovered in your journey about crop circles?
Much more than I imagined. I thought I was dealing with two-dimensional shapes, and I found out that they're not only three-dimensional, they're also four-dimensional. In the way we understand the world of the invisible world, the dimensions aren't so clearly defined in reality. The one thing I have found is that the symbols tend to communicate through the subconscious. It's almost like they're mirrors of humanity. And it seemed a bit strange to talk about that at the time, until we began to look at the actual shapes and realize that the harmonics that are taking place behind the scenes are exactly that. They are communicating to the human subconscious right through the DNA structure. And by this I mean that, for example, if you take a crop circle that's a straight line with two circles on it, on one level you'll see that it's basically a dumbbell shape. Now, if you look at the invisible geometry that links the shape of that circle to that circle over there and the space in between them, you'll find that it's full of geometric arrays, and all of these arrays are all related to sacred geometry, which itself is a distillation of planetary orbits and universal principles. But even more fundamental is the fact that these geometric shapes actually underlie the very crystal structure of human DNA. So when we start saying, yes, I recognize these things and my body seems to vibrate with these designs, what's happening is that your DNA and the very molecules in your body are reacting to something that they recognize. You're looking in the mirror, essentially. And your brain can't process it because it defies logic at first level, but all the molecules in your body are reacting to it in a very favorable way. So when I hear people talking about changes in their lives, changes in their perspective, in their level of awareness, then I can start believing it, because you can validate that under a microscope as well. That fundamentally has been the biggest surprise to me, because it means that the whole communication is operating at a very, very common denominator level, right at the microbial level of life. It's imprinting information and it's helping people to wake up. So far above and beyond all the light phenomena that I've seen, the balls of light, the beams of light that I've witnessed, along with many farmers and many people, along with the scientific evidence with its soil changes, the changes in the way that plants have been molecularly altered, that's been the biggest one, because it relates directly to fundamental human principles of who we are and where we're going.
So socially, you have seen over the years a very big change in regards to people's perspective, people's feelings and points of view about crop circles in England and around the world.
Yeah, I have, and I've also seen a great polarity taking place as well, because, and it was explained to me that, once the light appears, so it attracts its natural opposite. And I find that in crop circles, whether it's just research or just in people who involve themselves with that, there's a huge polarization where people are either incredibly for the phenomenon or they're incredibly against it. There's very little grey middle ground in all of this. And it seems to be becoming much more protracted as the years go by, as the believers and the non-believers seem to be attacking each other in equal amounts, and the same thing happens in the media. It's quite concerning, because you begin to realize how people develop, or human beings develop, religious beliefs, and then they become very intolerant. So I saw this over the last 15 years go from a very wide-based phenomenon where people were very open, very tolerant of other people's views, to people developing entrenched belief systems. But still, we don't know everything. If we knew everything, we'd all be making crop circles, and we still can't replicate them. So it's interesting to see how it's actually developed people, consciously and subconsciously, through their interaction in the phenomenon. But by and large, my experience has been mostly positive. There's been people who have done great positive things with the designs in either healing arts, or also in communication arts, disseminating the information to even to schools, where the kids now in some places in California even use the images of the crop circles to learn about geometry and mathematics, whereas before they were involved in watching the designs, they had no interest in these subjects whatsoever. So even at that very basic elemental stage, it's providing great benefit to society.
Okay, what about the indigenous religious fractions of England? Like the old Wicca religion, the old pagan religions and stuff like that. Have they become more vocal since crop circles have become like such a big media attraction?
Oh yes, they've certainly become much more visible. It's given the pagan cultures, someone who lives in the country. It's nothing devil worshipping about that. It's given the pagans and the Celtic cultures of certainly Northern Europe much more permission to come out to the open and say, look, here's some actual evidence that it shows that there is an invisible universe that communicates with us, and this is something that our ancestors going back 4,000, 8,000 years were very much into. So in one way it's beginning to help them come out of the woodwork again. There seems to be a resurgence of interest in ancient communication and ancient systems of knowledge, which once sustained entire civilizations for thousands of years in great balance, which is something we obviously need now. And at the other end of the scale, we have people who are fundamentalists on the Catholic Christian side, who are saying these are signs of the devil. The wonderful placid Amish in Missouri and the Southern American states, they'll They'll burn their crops rather than let people photograph crop circles on their land because they think it's the sign of the devil or the sign of Armageddon. And then, of course, you've got some of the scientific community who, or should I say the unenlightened scientific community, that think the whole thing's a joke anyway. And they'll do everything possible to avoid the evidence. In fact, they study crop circles by either denial or avoidance, telling you the whole thing's a big joke. And yet people within NASA, who have actually communicated with me, are telling me that they are very much interested in what the crop circles are doing because they begin to extract technology out of them. But they won't announce this in public, you know. So I'll mention it now.
In public.
In public. So it seems to be flushing people out of the woodwork in one way or another, either whether they're totally opposed to it, whether they're totally for it. It's validating one side, and it's also helping people who are on the fence it helps them to give them a sort of a validation that they can come out of the woodwork and begin to take a position on something. So it's good. It's beginning to get people to question.
Would the same apply to the American crop circle culture? I mean, since the appearance of it, have they become more excited? Are they more accepting as opposed to, say, the English? Is there any difference, really?
Yes and no. I've seen signs that some of the people who are taking an active interest in the phenomenon in America are developing the same bad habits that we develop in England, which is that the research community has become extremely polarized, where people have taken incredible sides on what is correct, and then they begin to ostracize those who are actually doing the real work. And inevitably, the way things happen is that the people who know the least have been put on a pedestal, and they're basically the ones that are giving out the most misinformation, as much as the hoaxes are doing, which is really annoying. But yet, amid that, there's a small cluster of people who are doing very honest, based work. And Jeffrey Wilson has done a great job in America of bringing disparate people together to try and bring them onto a table to say, look, we don't care about fighting, we just want to show what information you have. Let's just put it on the table, and you take out of it whatever you want. You know, don't bring any judgment to it. So he's done a great service to the community to try and bring people together and avoid the polarization. So that's one positive aspect. The Canadian researchers, in my experience, have been the most positive so far. They're very open-minded, very willing to share, very willing to say those, very difficult words, I don't know, which you don't hear very much today. So you see how after a few years they begin to develop the same traits that we've become encumbered with in England, which is the complete destruction of the research community through ego-based ideas, which isn't going to get us anywhere. I mean, none of us have all the answers. And if we did, we'd all be creating crop circles, just like that. And I'm sure one way we will, once we get the answer.
And what the Aboriginal people of North America, how have they reacted to all of this?
Oh, very positively. In fact, they were one of the first people that helped us to decipher the actual shapes when they first appeared throughout the 1980s and up right until the early 90s, when they were still simple shapes. Because they recognize many of the designs as illuminating part of their own culture. We actually can see a lot of the crop circle designs in petroglyphs around the Hopi lands, the Navajo lands. Same here in Australia. It's the same thing. They talk about the shapes as being fundamental communication images, which are archetypal messages of communication between worlds. So we're able to learn from their cultures what some of the simple circles mean. In North Dakota, they've even taken it a step further, where the tribes there talk about the circles actually being part of the Star Nation's communication. In other words, the sort of off-planet cultures, and here I'm talking about either physical and non-physical entities, which are very much behind the origin of some of the Native American cultures, as they claim in their own right. And they say that some of these symbols are very much part of the cultures that brought them genetically to Earth in the first place. And this is from their point of view. It's not me just sort of giving you my point of view. This is what they say. And that some of these beings that they are always in contact with in the Aboriginal lands and the Native American lands, they sometimes make the circles as well as part of a communication process.
You were talking about the underlying energy and the message to the DNA and the geometry and so on. And then now you're talking about the symbols. Is there any coherent message emerging through known symbols?
Yes, there is.
That these are saying.
Yeah, because the symbols are almost like hieroglyphs, and hieroglyphs we know are self-contained pieces of information, and you can actually condense an entire amount of an encyclopedia of knowledge into a hieroglyph. And the same thing's happening with some of the circles, where you'll take one design and you can actually extract about 10 different layers of meaning out of one of them. They all will seem to be slightly contradictory, but yet they're all absolutely correct. It depends how you view it and who you are viewing it. And that's usually been the sign of a much more advanced civilization, to be able to condense that much information into a symbol. So some of them are readable, and in fact some of them, and I remember a case in a field in England called Eastfield, where we get a lot of designs each year, but there's been 3 designs which were separated by 3 and 6 years apart, combining into a 9-year period, which is numerologically is a number of completion, ironically enough. Where the symbols, they look like a very straight line of circles. The next symbol along would be the DNA, and then the next one would be like a serpent. The 3 of them can be actually overlaid to give you the entire picture of how human DNA can be altered by the light spectrum. So that's over a 9-year period with 3 different designs laid one on top of the other. So there is a bit of, how should I say, an awareness that as we go through time and you begin to put the symbols side by side through similar positionings in fields, they begin to give you an actual message, an actual full story. Not just a symbol by itself, but when you start putting them together, they start getting part of the story. So we're in the middle of that now.
And as a species, are we clever enough to extract what we need to help our planet at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think we have within us, in our energy field and our DNA, all the knowledge that's ever existed. It's just that you are conditioned not to believe it. So consequently, the crop circles, by example, are working at a subconscious level. They're awakening parts of your DNA, your memory, and we can actually prove this as well by some of the designs which have appeared in the fields, which seem to coincide with parts of our human DNA molecule when nothing is happening. In other words, there are parts of our coding which are waiting there, waiting to be awoken in order to us to recognize something. What that is, I don't know. But it seems to be obvious that they are helping people at a subconscious level to wake up. So even though if you don't consciously recognize what the symbols are working from within to do certain things at a pre-given and a predetermined point in time.
Well, there are huge gaps in the human genome. I saw a graphic representation, and we really have only activated a very small amount of the potential in our DNA. So could this be activating some of those unused, unawakened areas?
I think they are, yeah. I think part of the circles, and again going back to some of the work of people like Greg Braden, who found that some of the circles seem to coincide with parts of our DNA which are unused for protein. So the logic is that God doesn't leave things out by accident. So they're obviously there to be used for the future. And again, all of this seems to coincide with prediction that at this point in our history, we would either have to wake up to our responsibility and our greater awareness, or we'd just basically have to die as a race. So it's up to us which way we want to go. The circles aren't here to answer and help anybody elevate themselves, because it's too ridiculously easy. We have to do that for ourselves. So whether we do it or not is up to us, but the imprint is there should we choose to use it.
With the like the complexity of the circle designs, have like with the northern hemisphere as opposed to southern hemisphere, like England and America, have these designs developed at the same pace, or has America been a few years behind in the complexity of the designs as they appeared in England?
This seems to be much simpler elsewhere in the world, actually, and I don't have an answer to why that should be. I mean, we see crop circles happening throughout Canada and America all the time. In fact, the Canadian prairies get 20% of the world's reported crop circles. But for the last 20-30 years, they've been simple, or they've been simple circles with rings, that kind of stuff that we were seeing in England back in 1980. Once in a while you get some complex patterns, but they're very rare. And the most incredible of all was the one that appeared in 1991 in the Alvord Desert in Oregon, which is basically a Sri Yantra mandala, a very complex mandala, which was etched 3 inches into the desert floor, 13.3 lines of etched crop circle, as I would call it, because no one ever was able to figure out if it was a genuine thing or not. But certainly when the local air guard flew over this enormous design in a desert floor where it was 120 degrees in the shade. They didn't see any tracks going in or out. They didn't see the design halfway made. It just appeared there overnight, fully complete. And when people actually went there to actually analyze the design, when they drove across the desert floor in 4x4 vehicles, the tire marks were left all the way across the floor, and yet there was not one mark in or out. So that's been the most complex design that I know of outside England. But it seems to be that the great complexity of the designs is always in southern England.
Okay, because in Australia, I mean, it's almost as if the crop circle designs on our continent are several years behind, you know, complexity-wise, as compared to say England and the United States. But what we've noticed back in the year 2000, when we're out in the Red Centre, was there are something very similar to what you've just described in the desert, where you've got markings that appear to be etched into the soil itself. And
Vodka and orange, thank you.
and when we spoke to the local Aborigines about it, they basically said, you know, these are being put there by the ancient ones, by an intelligence that's long since sort of kind of disappeared.
Yeah, and we have the same thing in England as well, and Northern Europe. And we have one of the greatest concentrations of sacred sites anywhere in the world, and they have exactly the same history. And it's interesting that all the crop circles, no matter where they appear around the world, and we're talking 29 countries here, they always appear in the vicinity of existing or old sacred sites, which have now since been ploughed out. So the connection exists between the two sacred spaces, and the two are actually talking one to another because they all appear along the same lines of magnetic energy. So there's a connection to the ancient past that they keep reminding us and bringing us back to as well.
Right, and with the human involvement, I mean, naturally, I mean, you've got this wonderful, you know, puzzling phenomena happening, and you've got human beings being human beings. They want to participate, they want to recreate some of these markings, and as you and I know, I mean, these markings have also developed in complexity, and you know, some very, very interesting designs have been created by human beings. I mean, have these people themselves changed? Have they, you know, do they sort of feel as if they're being led into creating these designs, whether it's subliminal or whatever?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I mean, there's been a few cases where people have actually felt compelled to go into a field, having designed something on a piece of paper with the intention of making a crop circle, and they'll go into a field in the middle of the night and they'll suddenly feel compelled to design something really different, which immediately gets my attention, because you don't go into the middle of the field and plan something, I mean, create something in the dark with planks of wood, knowing you might get prosecuted for it, without prior planning. You can't do that. I mean, it's just foolhardy, and it doesn't achieve anything, because the likely result is that you're going to make a big mess in the dark. And it's actually freaked them out to no degree, that when they look at what they did in the morning and they realize that the pattern they made is very coherent, but it had no resemblance to what they were going to do originally. And they have said, quote, it was as if someone was feeding us the information, and they felt very, very spooked, and they've actually gone around making more designs with the intent of actually communicating with whatever consciousness they felt was interacting with them. So that in itself is worthy of interest, because it shows us that there is an interaction going on, which is going on with the genuine circles anyway, where they're feeding information to people and also validating people's notions by designs. And by the same tokens, they were actually also putting information to people's heads, because sometimes, from my experience, I read transcripts from a psychic who's been very much involved in the crop circle phenomenon way before it was even made public, that at certain points the circle making force would influence people to make them, because the planetary conditions weren't ready. In other words, the magnetic lines weren't rightly energized, or the particular atmospheric conditions weren't right for them to actually create a genuine crop circle. But the information had to go down, because it was part of part of a communication that had to take place. And they said we would sometimes use people to put ideas into their heads, and they weren't sure where it was all coming from. And 10 years later, here we are, it's happening. And all this information was never published, so the hoaxers would have known that this would have been happening behind the scenes. So there is a human element behind it, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I've read a lot about the White Brotherhood or galactic beings living on the planet in the Himalayas or various hidden groups, secret societies. If these groups do exist, are some of these messages for them, telling them what their next mission is or what they're doing? Have you come across anything of that nature?
Not really, but the information that I do know is that the information is non-proprietary, it's for everybody. Hence it doesn't ally, so the crop circles don't ally themselves with any religious group, political group, fundamentalist group. They are for everybody, and it's the communication is on a personal level. It's what you want to get out of it. Like I said, the symbols are hieroglyphic, therefore there'll be many different layers of information and each person will see them differently, which is one big reason why people fight over them. You know, they'll say, it means that, or it means that, or it means that. Well, they mean all of those things, whatever is right for you. So that's how they're communicating. They're not allowing themselves to ally themselves with any specific group, because then that would by itself generate an inverse reaction from another group that felt that they weren't being communicated with.
So the message, so what is the message exactly that you're trying to portray to people? You know, like you're going around the world, you're talking about this phenomena. What's the essence of what you're trying to say to us, you know, to the general public?
Well, the essence of, I mean, I'm not trying to say anything, I'm just providing facts, you know, because otherwise I'll be giving you my opinion, which wouldn't be of any use to anybody, because it's just my opinion. But the facts, as I understand them, and through my experience and the experience of people around me, suggests that these circles are here because they are trying to get us to rise to meet our obligations as human beings on this planet. And it's all about responsibility. They're helping us to take responsibility for our actions, get us to be good citizens of the planet, because everything that's happening down here that we're doing to the planet is all having an energetic repercussion elsewhere in the universe. Everything we do down here is sending out shockwaves throughout the universe, and at some level they are interacting and influencing what other people are doing elsewhere. So you have a lot of consciousness around the planet at the moment, looking at how we are going to develop, where we are going to go in this new stage of evolution, because we are ready to make that jump. And we're either going to make the jump positively, or we're basically going to perish. It's one or the other. This is the 11th hour. And so the circles are here with the information, pumping information to the natural systems of the earth, interacting with natural organisms like human beings, and they're giving us a chance to actually wake up and realize what it is that we're doing. And I know it sounds very simplistic, but that really is it. And it's simplistic, but yet it's a very, very important message, because if we don't get this right, we're gone.
So, yeah, do it or lose it, basically.
Exactly. And it may sound corny, but that's all there is to it. And it's obvious when you think about it, but we forget about this every day. It's a wake-up call. It's a big wake-up call. But as the Hopi once said, you know, we're the ones we've been waiting for. You know, don't expect anybody else to come up and fish us out of this problem. We have been given the opportunity and the tools with which to wake up, and now it's up to us to apply these tools. And the tools are all there in the circle design. You just have to go and play with them.
When I see a picture of a crop circle, it's like something opens up within me, and the crop circle picture feeds my soul or something.
Exactly.
Something was missing, and this is filling it, and I can't get enough of them when I see these pictures.
You just proved my point, yeah. See? This is exactly what I said.
So it's doing something to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Only if you allow it. You have to allow it.
I love them.
Yeah.
But I don't know where to take it beyond that. I mean, I haven't been able to abandon my kids and go and study them or whatever, so...
But it fills you with passion, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You wake up every morning, you feel alive. That in itself is maybe all you need to keep you going. And your passion will transfer to somebody else, and they will take that up as well. So some people will be called to actually actively work on the designs and promote the designs, and some people will be activated to support from the sidelines. You can't have, you've got to have some Indians and some chiefs. It's just the way it happens. And but we've all chosen at a soul level to also be part of that. So I guess my choice, and I didn't realize this was going to happen in my life ever. I mean, I was in advertising. I was a million miles away from crop circle research. I was making a lot of money, and now I don't make any money. So I'm not doing it for that reason. But had I known what I was going to get involved into, I probably would not consciously have chosen it. But yet I must have chosen at some level in my existence to accept this responsibility. and some people have chosen to accept to support people on the sides as well. So it's part of a collaborative effort on all sides to bring this information forward. There's no right-wrong hierarchy, or they are the chosen masters that are bringing this information out, and there's none of that. It's just people supporting each other to help the greater good with this information, because it's only by supporting each other that we're going to get the information out. So there's no gurus in this.
So would you say that these celestial markings bring hope to humankind that there could be a better future?
Absolutely, but we have to create that future. They're not going to provide it for us. They're giving us an idea, a mirror of what to expect, and if we like what we see, then we should strive for that. They're almost giving you a sense of perfection, of beauty, of a system based on love and fundamental responsibility. But we have to want it badly enough to actually achieve it. They're not going to do it for us. The circles by themselves aren't going to do anything other than just activate things. And once you attach yourself to the design being to unlock parts of you becomes a relationship, a back and forth relationship. As I call them, they're keys of activation, which once you give permission for them to work with you, they'll start opening up bits and pieces of you. And once you open up bits and pieces of yourself and you connect the dots, so the more the keys will start coming. But you're the ones who have to do all the work.
So it should be, really.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the only way human beings learn. It's through trial and error, but the only way to solve our own problems is for us to deal with those problems.
Absolutely. We have to apply the instruction manual and actually, fix the model ourselves. Tune the carburetor ourselves. It isn't going to be magically done for us by somebody else.
So somewhere in the past, the manual on how to survive human civilization was lost, and now we have to sort of refine that and sort of reconnect and progress from there.
Well, it's funny actually you say that. Reconnect comes from a Latin word called religio, which is where the word religion comes from. And it's funny how we've sort of given our power away to connect with the invisible universe, which is what always stimulated our ancestors. How they were able to get information from other levels of reality to assist them down here on the terrestrial plane. And now we use religion as a middleman to help us connect with God in the biggest sense of the word. And to a certain degree, we've given up power away to somebody else. We've given up power away to a middleman, and it ain't working.
No, not when you use it for other means.
Yes, I mean it's become a system of control, and but that's part of the human experiment, where for the last 4,000 years we've undertaken an experiment to give our power away to the few who've controlled the many, and the experiment is now over. And this happens every 4,000 years like clockwork. We, as a consciousness, undertake an experiment to experience something. Between 8,000 and 4,000 BC, for example, or should I say, no, 6,000 to 2,000 BC, we're experimenting with the female principle. We honoured and worshipped the female principle. I'm not just talking about worshipping women. I mean, men were doing it too. We were worshipping the lunar cycle in nature, and we worked with that cycle in order to maintain a balance of existence on Earth. Once we learned that and we experienced that, we decided to do the inverse, which was to give our power away. So the shaman becomes the priest who takes over the control of the tribe and begins to control the tribe, because they become the center of attention, the ego, and in a sense the star. And today we had this wonderful culture. And talking of a star,
Well, it's been a dismal failure, this 4,000-year experiment.
Well, it hasn't, because it's the experience that you have to remember. Don't attach the judgment to it, because what you've learned out of this experience is that it doesn't work. It brings with it an unbalanced way of living, where we give away our control to other people to do the thinking for us. And that's how we ended up in this disaster. That is the experiment, and this is the experience. So no experience is ever lost. So now we as souls know what it means to give our power away. Chances are we're not going to do it again. So this is why we're now ready to go to another level of existence, which is now why we're in the middle of all this chaos. We feel that something needs to change, and the powers that be, who've held on for this experience for 4,000 years, know the time is up, and they're going to hang on for their life. And you can see today that they are trying their damn best to make sure that they retain power, but it's falling apart.
And do we know what the next experiment will be then?
Yes, the concept is that we're going to match head and heart into harmony, in alignment, and we're going to have a fusion between male and female principles, so you have perfect balance. and it will also be an age of knowledge where we actually use the knowledge to further the greater benefit of the common good. That's where we're trying to get to. The age of Aquarius.
Well, human nature being human nature. I mean, in your opinion, do you believe we've got the substance to sort of put all our sins aside and really strive for this, or do you feel
Absolutely. And in fact, I was working with a very respected psychic on this, and we were getting a lot of information back, and they were saying from the spirit world that we are actually, as a complete consciousness, much closer to hitting that switch where you hit critical mass. Where once you hit critical mass, you begin to alter the change and create the change for the positive, because you don't really get to hear about this stuff on television. I mean, it doesn't make news, and yet there are millions of people around the world who, like us, are sitting in living rooms discussing what's going on. Why don't things make sense? How can we improve the world? We're only a couple of percentage points away from flipping that switch, but it just doesn't seem that way because you've fed so much stuff on the media. It's all doom and gloom. So the trick is, except that there is a bit of doom and gloom here and there, even though right now in the world most countries are actually at peace, they're not actually at war. So yeah, only about 10% or maybe even 5% of the world right now is actually at war. So things are actually pretty good when you think about it from that point of view.
Just basically the information I'll be sharing with you, as you'll notice as I go on, it's pretty personal, basically physically and emotionally, and it's hard to talk about at times, but in the interest of research and the truth, I'll just discuss it in detail basically. I won't skip anything or miss anything. Okay. What seemed to be the beginning of my experiences occurred one evening when my wife, at the time my fiancée, and I witnessed our first UFO sighting in February 1988. What we saw that night did not seem to be man-made. A light source travelled across the sky, and we're basically sitting in the car and we're looking out the window. She's in the passenger seat, I'm in the driver's seat, we're looking out the window, and we see a light travelling across the sky, pretty big. At the time straight I said, oh, it's probably a satellite or something. And then as we watched this for a few minutes, it got to a point where it hovered above a triangular formation of stars, 3 stars, and it seemed to shoot a beam of light. Say it's in point A up here, it'd shoot a beam of light to this star, and it appeared 2 places at once, and then it disappeared from point A. And it did this erratically, like all over the place. We got the impression it was searching for something or was chasing something, but it did this just erratically. There wasn't a pattern to it, it was just jumping all over the place. And it always appeared at 2 places and then disappear. So I would say it was that fast that it was appearing. You could see it in the 2 places at once. We watched this for a while, and we just stood there basically questioning each other all the time, just trying to confirm that what we were looking at, we were actually both seeing this thing. And we came to the conclusion then, I mean, I sort of tried to tunnel my vision and use the scopes of the European telescope. It just, what we were looking at, I've never ever seen anything manoeuvre like it or travel like that, and I've never seen it before, never seen it since. But it kicked off a bit of interest with me, where I made a couple of telephone calls, and there wasn't any UFO groups in Sydney at the time, and if there was, I think Bill's was the only one at the time, and there wasn't really much happening. So it was pretty difficult to try and get in touch with somebody who could sort of, help out and give me some information of what this thing could have been. Now, approximately 5 months later, in July 1988, I had an experience which changed my life. I must inform you here that I did not believe in UFOs, nor did I know anything about abductions. I've always been open-minded to the possibility that life must exist elsewhere in the universe, but never thought of them travelling here for any reason. Anyway, on July 1988, I was sitting with my father in the lounge room, watching a television program which had been on for about 15 minutes, when my brother, who was sleeping in my bedroom, walked in and asked me to watch television in my room, as he wanted to sleep in the lounge room. Of course, it didn't make sense at the time for me. He was asleep in my bedroom. Gets up, telling me he wants to sleep in the television room. It just didn't make sense, but I didn't question it. I walked into my bedroom, I switched the TV on and sat on the bed. I was lying on the bed with my feet crossed, and as I rested my head on the pillow, I felt something grab me around the ankles, and instantly, as soon as I felt something grab me, I got this sensation of like pins and needles crawling up through my body. And as it got to my top of my head, I felt like there was just ants crawling through my scalp. It was like electrical static of some kind. I became paralysed. I couldn't move. I had my eyes open. I assumed that if my eyes were closed, if I was asleep, I wouldn't have seen anything. But because I was awake, my eyes were open. I could see what was happening around me. The only thing I could actually move were my eyes. Other than that, nothing at all. I just lay there paralysed. My brain was functioning, but I couldn't do anything physically. I tried to call out to family members. I called out to my dad, or tried to call out to my dad and to my brother. Couldn't make a sound actually. Like I was thinking about what I wanted to say or do, but just couldn't do it. I couldn't put it into couldn't get my voice out or anything. It was frustrating just sitting there. I was 23 years old at the time, and I'm thinking to myself, because I didn't think about UFO abductions or anything like that, I'm thinking, I'm paralysed, and my parents are going to walk in the morning, and from then on I'll be in a wheelchair. It was frightening at the time, and all of a sudden, I look at the foot of the bed and I notice a hooded figure, about 3 to 4 foot in height, wearing what I call maybe a monk's robe, for example, with the hood over his head. And on the right side of the bed, I noticed 3 figures wearing the same robes with the hoods over their heads also. Their faces reminded me more of gorilla faces. They were really wide faces, deep set wrinkles in the forehead, flat nose, very much like a gorilla. The colour of their face seemed like a pretty shiny black, darkish black colour with a shine to it, like a leathery sort of look. I didn't actually touch them or anything like that. I don't know what their skin felt like, or if they were solid or anything. But at the time I was petrified. I looked at these creatures, and to me they looked horrific. And I was thinking that, this is evil, devil or whatever, and I'm having this experience that's going to bloody either end up being in a mental institution from it or frighten me to death. Something else caught my attention. With the corner of my eye, I looked over to the left side of the bed, and I noticed 2 beings. These guys, that's the first type that I saw, and that's the second. There was 4 of these guys, 1 at the foot of the bed, 3 on the right hand side of the bed, and there was 2 of these taller guys, about 7-8 foot tall, goldish. They had like a jumpsuit on, pretty tight fitting thing, but their face, the colour, it looked like it was a yellowish, sort of goldish colour. They were very, very tall, slim. I couldn't see any bone structure like joints or things like that. They had very large oval-shaped heads. With the chin came to a point. It was more pointed than anything. They had a little slit for a mouth, as if you just got a pencil and just put a line there. I didn't see lips, teeth, anything like that. I didn't see their mouth or lips move even like that. I saw lips even, just a little line. They had 2 little holes for a nose. Like you couldn't even see, there was no bone structure. There was no. It was just a flat thing, 2 little holes in there. And their eyes were almond-shaped, huge black eyes, and looking at the first 4 creatures and being petrified, and then seconds later looking at these 2 taller ones and the one closest to me, I looked in his eyes, and it was like I just fell into this empty space or something, and I could feel that this being could reading me like a book, basically, knew everything about me. And it was then like I had telepathic communication with him, with the one closer to me. And it was just simple things like, don't worry, we'll not harm you, stay calm, it's okay, we're not going to hurt you, stay calm, it'll be like the last time, we're not going to hurt you, just a calming thing. When he said it'll be like the last time, I've got a memory of when I was 6.5 years old overseas, where something happened on the roof and there was about 8 children involved, and I didn't put it down to a UFO experience, I didn't put it down to anything. But after having my experience and being in contact with many people around the world who had the experiences, I realised that what happened to me when I was 6.5 was actually UFO related and could have even been an abduction at the time. I was back 2 weeks ago, I was back overseas for 3 months, and I actually tried to get access to the place where this happened, which is across the road from my house. And the girl that lives there, or the family that lives there, their eldest daughter was pretty sick. She had cancer and she actually died last Tuesday, passed away. But I didn't want to sort of put them out by asking them if I could sort of go in there and film and that. But I went over on our roof, which is 3 stories, and filmed across the road and filmed the area where this thing happened. I tried to speak to a couple of people who were there at the time, but they just seemed not to even remember the incident at all. Actually, they didn't seem to remember very much. They were shocked at my memory, because I left Lebanon when I was 7 years old in 1973. And they were shocked at how much memory I had from my childhood. Anyway, the being closest to me that communicated with me telepathically leant over towards me and pointed what looked at the time to me looked like a needle, or a little sort of, or I'll say needle with a long flexible tube and a little light at the tip of it. He leant over, inserted it in my head about here, and I blacked out. I couldn't just boom, lights out basically. I came to what I thought was about 10 minutes later, and I literally sprang out of bed because I had been fighting this paralysis feeling for so long, trying to move, trying to do things. I jumped out of bed, sprung out of bed, walked out of the room, walked into the TV room. I tried to wake up my father at the time, and I was trying to like shake him for a couple of minutes. He wouldn't wake up, and same thing with my brother. After a couple of minutes of shaking him, he woke up. The first thing he said at the time, as soon as he woke up, the first thing he said it in Lebanese too, which sounds a bit different than when he said it in English, but he said that he felt switched off, which if you say it in Lebanese, it's like more prominent how he said it, like you don't say things like that. And he said that he felt like he'd been switched off and was like lost, he didn't know where he was basically. As he got his bearings, we started talking, and I asked him how long he thought it had been since I went to my bedroom, and he said probably 15 minutes, which is approximately the time that I thought. But as we spoke, we realised that the TV was just a blur. There was nothing, no show playing, no picture, just a blur. And 2.5 hours had gone by. Looked at the time, 2.5 hours had gone by, and I got no explanation for it. I don't remember being taken on a craft. I don't remember anything as far as after the thing being inserted in my head. I just don't remember anything at all. I spoke to my brother for a little while. I went to the fridge, got a glass of water, walked back into the bedroom, put the glass down on the bedside chest and got back in the bed, and I just fell asleep. Like, didn't even think about what happened to me. I mean, you have a dream, you have a dream, or you have something you think about, and you toss and turn, you keep thinking about this thing, and it's not pretty easy to go to sleep after something like this happened to you. For some reason, I just fell asleep, and I had a good sleep. Got up in the morning. I noticed the glass of water was still there, so to me it confirmed that something did happen the night before. I mean, that was my way of confirming it. Anyway, I went in the shower, I had a shower. I was drying off, and as I was drying off my leg, I felt like a burning sensation on my leg, on my shin. And I had a look, and it was like as if somebody had put a lit cigarette and let it burn for a couple of minutes. It was red raw, a deep indentation, circular. I connected it straight away to the night before. I knew that it had something to do with the night before. 6 hours later, this was sent to me from Melbourne. by a woman who, so this is probably the first picture sent to me that resembled what I saw. And to me, this lady heard about my experience, didn't get a complete description of what I saw and sent me this, and I was pretty impressed because this is exactly pretty similar to what I saw. But the guy I saw wasn't on steroids, he wasn't that muscly. But this is another painting somebody had seen and sent it to me. You can see the similarities. I mean, not all, there's different types obviously, but there seems to be the greys and these guys remain abducted. This is a scoop mark. See a better picture on there. Okay, I've got 4 of them now. There's one there, one here, one on the back of my calf. That's what they basically look like. The 4 of them, every scoop mark we've looked at looks identical to that. There's like 3 deeper indentations as if they've scooped it out for something. I know a lady, Kathy, who has actually got 3 marks on her forehead. You might have seen that on The Extraordinary or the UFO Files. She's in that also. Hopkins book, you can see consistencies. This is from America, so I mean, it's not like different countries have different scoop marks. Everybody seems, all abductees seem to have consistencies in scoop marks, the type of scoop mark you have. There's obviously different types. Okay, these are some different beings that were reported to us. This is Kelly's, from Kelly's experience. When I first started dealing with my experience, this is after I noticed there was a mark on my shin and like I'm thinking what's going on and started questioning things. That same day, 6 hours after I discovered this mark on my leg, I went and picked up my fiancée from work. And as we're driving back, I said to her, look, something happened to me last night, I've got to talk to somebody about this. And I started to just tell her what happened. And as I was talking to her, I said to her, there was a needle inserted in my head and I've touched it and there was dry blood under my fingernail. She had a closer look and she could see a puncture mark with dry blood around it. And I lifted up my jeans to show her the mark, which was supposed to be red raw, and it healed like you saw it in the slide. It's a scar, it's obviously there, but it was healed, it wasn't red raw anymore. This is 6 hours later, and this is something that's interested the scientists now doing the DNA work, in that if they can find out what was whatever they put on this sore and healed so quickly, I mean, it could revolutionise surgery as far as stitches and so on. If you paint this on and it heals quickly, then we'll make big money out of that. My fiancée and we're driving, I'm telling her all this and I'm shocked that she's even still listening to me. I mean, I thought I was crazy at the time. But as we're driving, we notice in a bus shelter an advertisement, and it had a picture of this being, and it said they're coming, and then the next advertisement said they're here, something like that. And I looked at it, I was driving behind a bus at the time, and I looked at this thing and I just stopped in the middle of the road. I just hit the brakes and stopped, and she looked at it and she said, this is exactly what you've just described to me. And I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know what the advertisement was about at all. After a couple of days, made a few phone calls. I discovered that was for the book Communion. It was Whitley Strobel was coming out to talk about this. So I wasn't aware of Whitley's case before my experience. My fiancée was a bit concerned and she asked me to go and see a doctor, and I went to my family doctor. She had been my family doctor for 10 years. I couldn't believe it. I walked in there. I mean, when you know someone for 10 years, you know if they tell you stories, you know what they're like. I walked in there and I said, oh, can you have a look at this mark on my head, and showed her the one on my shin, and she just shrugged her shoulders and said, what do you want me to do? And I said, do you know what could have caused it? She said, no, what happened? I said, do you really want to know? And I obviously stupid enough to tell her. I told her exactly what had happened. I didn't try and change the story anyway to make it sort of more believable. I just told her what happened. She broke out in hysterical laughter, and I mean, people waiting in the waiting room heard this, and it was just, I couldn't believe it. And my comment to her at the time was, if you think I'm crazy, send me to a psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever, but don't sit there and laugh at me. She said to me, oh, don't be silly, Peter, you've hit your head on a nail at work, because I'm in the building trade. And I thought, I've stepped on nails at work and I go get a tetanus shot, you know. You don't hit your nail, get a nail through your head and wait till 2:30 in the morning to make up a story like this. I mean, needless to say, I lost all confidence in that doctor, and I've never been back to see her since, because I just thought that she wasn't professional in the way she dealt with me. Can you imagine how many other cases where people think, oh, okay, I'll go and speak to my doctor about it, and they end up either in a mental institution or just, you know, thrown out of the surgery and not looked at. No one cares really, because I suppose it's everyone wants their credibility, and the way to be credible is somebody suggests a UFO experience to you, you tell them you don't believe, and you're credible. Anyway, after many months of searching for help within UFO groups, I realised the need for a support group for people like myself. I wrote a number of letters to different professionals, hoping that one might reply. To my surprise, 12 wrote back, which was at the time was pretty good actually, because you couldn't talk to anybody. I'd telephone psychologists and psychiatrists, and as soon as I mentioned to them beings, I wouldn't even say alien or anything, just beings in the room, they'd hang up. It was frustrating trying to get somebody to talk to you. Okay, yeah, so we got 12 replies, and we held a meeting, and 12 professionals turned up. There was a doctor, two hypnotherapists, a psychologist, a physicist, and a counsellor, and a couple of others. So with the help of these professionals, in April 1993 we founded the UFO Experience Support Association. UFOs is a non-profit voluntary organisation, and we're basically dedicated to helping UFO experiencees to cope with and understand the encounters. We find that the most common factor among abductees is they all believe when they first have this experience, they don't know other people have had it, they think they're the only ones who are experiencing this, they think that they're crazy, they question their sanity and so on. But when they realise that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones having this experience, I think you feel a lot more comfortable that there are people like yourself experiencing similar things that you can speak to, and I think that helps a lot more than any professional could. I've had a lot of contact with abductees in Australia and around the world, and as you can see, like, you get a lot of letters and a lot of pictures that people draw, and I mean, if you're hoaxing something, you wouldn't put that much effort and time into it, and I find that a lot of abductees don't even want to put pen to paper, they just can't do it. It's pretty difficult to sit down and write something that you're sort of pretty concerned about. I've come across cases which you'll see in a minute, where even having the experience myself, somebody else tells me about their story and they describe the beings to me, and I just sit there and I wonder whether they're lying, whether they're crazy, whether they're telling the truth. But then you get something like this sent to you, and you could laugh basically. I mean, people see this at the end of their bed or standing next to them, and you wonder whether it's just their description of it is a bit different, I suppose, or they didn't look properly. But this woman swears that this, whatever you want to call it, was wearing a mask of an alien. It was actually a mask. And then I get this from Bud Hopkins in America, where one of the people he was working with had sent this to him, and it makes you wonder that, you know, it's not the only one, the previous one that I've sort of had sent to me. There are other things, people from all around the world are sending things that are pretty similar. So if you hear a story and it doesn't fit in with, you know, the norm, or what you want to call the norm, I wouldn't brush it aside, because you'll find that, just put it on file, because you'll find in the future you'll get another. And she drew this and gave it to her mother, and she's over the week she started drawing all these pictures and things. And there's one slide that I haven't got here, but she describes going into the ship, and then she feels like there's a lot of wind, and then another door opens. They take her through that door, and then there's nothing. She can't feel any wind or anything. She couldn't feel any temperature or anything like that. It was just like there was no environment there. The good thing about this was, as I said, the mother had never discussed UFOs with the daughter. The mother has had her own experiences which are documented, but she's never ever sort of gone public or spoken about it. The daughter had never heard her talk about this. So it fits a pattern where a family is involved and the children are also being abducted or having some sort of experience. Okay, go back a bit. Alright. I've been fortunate enough to meet some incredible people like yourselves. Some of whom I've become friends with, Mr. Chalker included. Actually, that's the thing I should comment on. In the beginning, I really steered away from Bill because a lot of this group I was involved with, which I won't name, used to really hammer into Bill and tell me not to speak to him, and I shouldn't share my experience with him because Bill he hides the information, he doesn't share it with the public, his CIA and all this. And I kept away from him, and it took me probably a year and a half before I even said hello to Bill and started speaking to him. And I used to avoid Bill like the plague when I'd sell raffles or anything. I wouldn't go near him. It was just, that's, you know.
He's bad, man.
But then when I spoke to him, I realised, you know, like Bill's pretty credible. He's respected around the world, and he set a high standard, such a high standard that these people couldn't really compete, or, you know. Basically, I think Bill did the proper method of research, and they just couldn't follow that. They didn't want to. I think it was easier for them to call everything a UFO before they even researched it. But anyway, after I got to know Bill, I realised that you don't judge people by what somebody else tells you. Just, you know, wait till you speak to them and then make your own decisions, especially in the UFO field. In 1996, Professor John Mack of Harvard Medical School visited Australia. During his visit, I organised a workshop with professionals and abductees. Professor Mack, after the meeting, we went back to my place and had a talk, and it was after a couple of hours of going through paperwork and having a chat, he asked me if I'd be the Australian representative for PEER, which is Program for Extraordinary Experience Research, based at Harvard. All I've been doing basically is just sending references to him, and he does the same if people send letters to him. I remember writing a letter to Bud Hopkins in 1993, I think, late 1993. It took a year and a half to come back to me, and all it said was, I'd advise you speak to a local researcher, Mr. Bill Chalker. So I could have, a year and a half I could have saved just by picking up the phone and calling Bill. But that just goes to show how busy people like Bud Hopkins are, and how, you know, how many people are having this experience worldwide. Okay. The focus for today's presentation occurred on Thursday the 23rd of July 1992. At the time I was suffering from head injuries due to an assault by 3 men on a job site in May 1992. Believe me, it was horrific injuries, massive head injuries I had. Due to the injuries I sustained, I was prescribed medications such as Panadine Forte, Voltaren and Prozac, of which I consumed 1 tablet only. I read some information about Prozac which I did not like, so I actually still got the bottle with only 1 tablet missing. During that period, due to the head injuries and concussion which I received, I would vomit a number of times a day. My short-term memory also suffered to an extent. On the morning of July 23rd, I had driven my wife to the railway station. On the way, I had to pull over probably 8 to 10 times and violently ill. Okay, I came back home from dropping her off at the station. I got back into bed about 7 I'd say. I was wearing a tracksuit pants and a sloppy Joe. I had a shower the night before. I went to bed. I fell asleep. I got up in the morning, as I said, drove to the station, came back home. I went straight back to bed. I was so ill. About 7:30 in the morning, I sat bolt upright in bed. I actually felt something jump on the bed, or like I thought at the time it was a cat. It was just really light, something jumped on the bed, and I sat bolt upright. I opened my eyes. I sat bolt upright and looked directly in front of me, and 2 foot away from me, straddling me basically, was this fellow. This is the first sketch that we put together. You can just imagine I'm lying there, she's on top of me. I sit bolt upright, and right in front of my face is this, well, this is there was a second female that sat to the right of the bed. She was basically just observing, just watching, and she's sitting exactly in that position. You can see from her features, she looks Chinese, Oriental anyway, and Everything about her was human except for her eyes. There wasn't any, I couldn't see any white in the eyes, it was more like darker than anything. Okay. Imagine sitting up in your bed and coming face to face with something like that. I'll say it now, I've said it before, if I didn't have the DNA evidence, the scientific backup, there is no way I would go public with this case even now. I mean, I can understand, you know, like Antonio Boas basically so long ago going public with an experience that he had that was a sexual nature. I can understand how hard it would have been for him. I mean, here I am, year 2000, and you know, everybody, I mean, UFO research has come a long way since his experience, and I still find it very, very difficult to talk about this. But anyway, as you can see, she's an attractive woman. The only thing about this is that the hair isn't right in this. The hair should be sort of flicked back more, like a Farrah Fawcett style, but too extreme. Her eyes, she was a very attractive looking woman. I mean, I'd pick her out if there was a million people, I'd pick her out in a split second. She had large eyes. Her face was a little bit longer than normal. She had huge eyes. Her eyes were like 2 to 3 times bigger than a human's eyes. And once again, there was hardly any white in the eyes. It was just a lot of dark colour to it. It was like it was all full of colour. Okay. I sat bolt upright. I would have been, I'd say 3 foot away, 2 to 3 foot away from her. She grabbed me with both hands, cradled the back of my head, and pulled me towards her breast. I sort of pushed back. I put both my hands against her and pushed back. She pulled me towards her again. I pushed back a second time. The third time she just used super strength, and she was like, just brought me straight into and buried my face into her breast.
Terrible.
Well, when you're feeling so sick and you've got head injuries and you're not with it, the last thing on your mind is sex, let me tell you. And then at the same time, I was on medication, and people can say, well, you were hallucinating, and that's where the hair comes into play and changes everything. But yeah, even I would have thought if I didn't have the hair, I might have thought that, yeah, you know, I might have been hallucinating. Anyway, she buried my face in her breast, and I'm claustrophobic at the best of times, and I just couldn't push away from her anymore. She just held me there. She was using super strength, basically. The only thing I could do was I took a bite and bit a little bit of a nipple. She didn't scream, she didn't react in any way that there was any pain, there was no blood. There was no reaction from her whatsoever, except she looked over at the Asian female that was sitting on the right side, or out to my right, and she communicated with her telepathically, and I kicked on that. It was just things like, he's done this wrong, this isn't the way it's done. Like, I screwed up, basically. And when I bit on a nipple, I swallowed this thing and it got stuck in my throat. It was only like a tip of a match head, say. And it got stuck in my throat. I started coughing, I look up and they've gone. There's no one there. I'm on top of the bed. When I went to sleep, I was under the sheets, and now when they disappeared, I look and I can see my legs now, so I'm on top of the sheets, still dressed, still in my tracksuit pants and top. I had a coughing fit, and this thing was stuck in my throat. I went into the kitchen, had a drink of water, had some bread, tried to wash it down. I couldn't wash it down. This thing was stuck in my throat for 3 days, and I'll skip a little bit here. My wife came home that afternoon and I was coughing like, you wouldn't believe, just bad coughing fits, and she said to me like, can I have some cough mixture or something? Like, I said to her, look, I'm not ready. I felt guilty in a way, like as if I had an affair or I played up on her or something, but I said to her, look, I'm not ready to talk about this now, but when I am, and I mentioned to you the coughing fit and what the experience I tell you, just, you know, connect the two, and she was okay. And I think it was about 2 weeks later that I actually built up enough courage or, you know, guts to talk about it with her. It shocked me how understanding she was about it all. I mean, as she said to me at the time, it's not something that I have control over. So I think that was the way she dealt with it. But anyway, after going to the kitchen and having a drink of water and trying to wash this thing down, I had the urge to go to the bathroom. So I go to the toilet, and I felt like there was barbed wire or razors or something slashing my penis. I had a look and there was 2 hairs, one about 8 centimetres, one about 15 centimetres, and they were sort of curled and cutting into the skin. It was pretty painful. Even to remove them was pretty painful. I removed the hairs, I put them in a plastic bag, and I put them in the filing. I don't know why I didn't even put them in the fridge. I didn't even think. I just put them in the filing cabinet in my file. Now that's the OS case. Okay. Just to give you an idea of leading to this hair sample, I received a hair sample, and in 1996 I gave it to a group in Melbourne and they tested it, and they were telling me, you know, all these exotic explanations for it and how exciting it was, and 3 years later I was still asking for information, and only last year I think it was, I received an email from this group, and it was like something like the hair sample that you sent us was interesting. We had a look at it, we visited the site where it came from, and there was a number of other samples, and then we lost track. So a lot of groups and individuals wanted to have a look at the hair and requested permission to look at the hair, but we couldn't track down the owners, so we didn't give permission. I'm thinking, I'm the owner of that sample in particular. You could easily contact me, but it just sort of, to me, it looked like they were hiding whatever information they got, and they weren't even going to give me back the sample, which I hadn't got back. So I was a little bit hesitant about any other sample and who I'd hand it over to. I mean, this is supposed to be one of the best groups doing this sort of work, and I wasn't happy at all with the outcome. So I mean, here I am speaking publicly about my experiences, and I have an experience that I've just described to you, which I didn't want to discuss publicly, simply because I had nothing to back me up. And if you look at it, you stand back and listen to this, you think, oh, this is probably nothing but a sexual fantasy. But being lucky enough to have the hair, I suppose, and the experience happened in 1992, late 98, I think, mid-98, was it, Bill? Mid-98 that you asked me for? Yeah. Late 1998, well actually in 1996 I was speaking to a television crew and Bill was present, and I think that was the first time Bill heard me talk about it. I had mentioned it to close friends like weeks after it happened, after I spoke to my wife about it, and we actually had a meeting in 1993 with the professionals, and that was the first meeting that we had, and I actually discussed this case because I thought if somebody went to them and spoke to them about a case with a sexual nature, I didn't want them to think that they're crazy or that it's a sexual fantasy thing. I basically just said to them, you know, dissect this case, you can use me as a guinea pig or whatever you want, but learn from this and, you know, we'll all benefit. So there was documentation by certain people, one of them being a doctor, who made notes at the time of what I said. Alright, so as far as I was concerned, I had an experience which I couldn't talk about, but I wanted to, but I had no backup for me to really sort of give me enough credibility, I'd say, to this. I mean, it's not that I didn't want to lose credibility by discussing this and not having backup for it. Anyway, 1998 comes along and Bill has contact with a number of scientists, and he called me one day and said, have you still got the sample? And I said, oh yeah, but I wasn't too sure if I wanted to hand it over, because I thought I've handed over one sample and I haven't got it back, and I didn't get back anything from it. There was no result, nothing, so I was a bit hesitant to do that. I'll just show you where this came from. This is the sort of creature it came from. It looks a bit like the Jellyville creatures, but a little bit more sort of horrific looking. And the hair was pretty cool. It was actually scary to look at, but it was very, very friendly. And it was around for about 3 months following these 2 girls, until one day it just went crazy and started throwing cassette cases on, breaking them, and a little girl was asleep in the bed, and this thing was looking through the window, and the girl screamed, so this thing started screaming, the dogs attacked it, and that's where the hair came from. There was chunks of hair all over the place in the morning. Well, you can see it's similar to those. I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, when eventually I decided, okay, I'll hand over the sample to Bill, I would have liked to have kept a little piece, but I didn't want to damage it in any way. I didn't want to cut anything off it. So I handed him both samples, and I hoped that, you know, I'd get a result somehow. It wasn't long, actually, probably within 3 months, that Bill called me and said, oh, you know, it's interesting, and Bill was playing it down a lot, actually. The scientists were pretty excited, and they were like going out with 5 theories, and Bill was trying, which is good. I actually like that he kept it pretty, yeah, kept the lid on everything. Yeah, because, I mean, you can get carried away with something like this. You've got evidence that you can look at, and I can see other researchers really, you know, trying to plug this as the Holy Grail, but Bill kept a level head about it and kept me informed. This one really registered with me until scientists came over and spoke to me and my wife and took blood samples off me, took hair samples, and I thought, whoa, this is getting done, you know, properly. They're doing proper research. And as results started to come out, I felt more confident to, you know, speak about this. And I mean, even after speaking to scientists and telling me that, yeah, it's very interesting and that, I really didn't know if I should go public with it. I was very hesitant at first, but when I realised how credible the people involved were and, you know, what qualifications they have, unfortunately they're not here to back us up with that, standing next to us saying, yes, we did the research and that, but hopefully one day they will. I just worked up enough courage, I suppose, to speak about it, and it's not very easy to speak about, you know, publicly. You mention your penis and things, sexual nature and that. It was difficult to try and do that originally, but I mean, it still is difficult. But anyway, I was more than impressed with the way it was handled and the people Bill's working with. I got to the point where I thought, I'm just going to step out of the UFO field for a while, and not step out, but just basically go quiet for a while, because I didn't want this case to get tainted in any way with politics or anything like that. So I invited everybody to get involved, and, you know, Bill's not even, you know, hogging the case and not letting anyone share it. It's basically made it available to everyone. All I can say, I mean, is I've had this experience. It's changed my life from the '88 experience, but then 1992, it just blew me away that I haven't experienced. I mean, all the time that I've been involved in UFO research, it's all been nighttime cases. I mean, rarely you get footage of daylight stuff, but I never heard anybody, well, talk to me or send me letters or speak anywhere about an experience happening like 7 or 7:30 in the morning, until Bill brought to my attention a case in Australia, actually, of a lady that had an experience at 7:30 in the morning or something. So just because a case is sort of rare and it's not, you know, inconsistent with other cases, it doesn't mean that it's something to sort of push away. But I've got to say, from my point of view, I'm so glad that credible scientists are doing the work on this. It'd be so sad to see a sample that I hung on to. See the camera. Yeah, it'd be a shame to have a sample, so, you know, a pretty important sample, go to waste like this other one did. And that's why I really have a lot of faith in Bill and his work. Findings and that, and I haven't said anything about scientific findings because I don't know much about DNA and science and science of it all. But I know one thing: there's a group of credible people working on this, and if anybody has any samples, I'd send them to Mr. Bill Chalker. Yeah, thanks a lot.
My talk tonight is going to be called
formally paranormal aspects of the UFO phenomena 1975 to 1999. Quite a mouthful, but what I'm going to try and do is break it into a number of sections to make it easier for us. Well, let me start with a very bold statement that Australian researchers, amongst others in the world, have really failed to come to grips with the link between the UFO phenomena and the paranormal. And I'm going to try and elaborate on that so that by the end of the evening, after we've had a bit of discussion about this topic, you can see whether you may or may not agree with that statement. Now, because I'm looking back over a bit of perspective, as far back as 1980, there was a California researcher called Anne Druffel, who's just had a book recently out, effectively telling you how to ward off or deal with UFO abductions. So if you see that around in the shops, well worth a read. But 20 years ago, she noticed that many of her UFO colleagues were actually ignoring the psychic or paranormal aspects of UFO reports. They just didn't want to know about it at all. And a few years later, an American folklorist called Eddie Bullard, who probably is one of the world's leading researchers on many aspects of the abduction phenomena, when he was discussing his findings in a mammoth 300 case study presentation that he did, he actually reminded us, for those that knew in the first place, that paranormal elements had really been dismissed through the 50s, 1950s, 1960s, and even into the 1970s. No one wanted to associate the two things together. They were just not interested in trying to see if there were any links between the two topics. Switching over to the other side of the Atlantic, how many people have come across British author and researcher Jenny Randall's work? Show of hands? Great, it's not mentioning Jenny quite a few times. We run a mutual fan club, Jenny and I. I mentioned her when I talk, she mentions me when she talks, so we've got a good deal going between us. The fact is that about 5 or 6 years ago, in a number of her works, and I think now she's written about 40 books, she actually accused, and I use the word accused, researchers in the USA of running a mile from paranormal aspects, and added that they actually seemed terrified to associate the two topics together. She didn't really comment about why or what she thought about it, but just the fact that that was her observations in the lectures that she'd given in the US. There was paranormal on one side, UFO research on the other, and the two didn't really meet terribly much at all. And so that's gone on over time. And here in Australia, apart from Victorian researcher Mark Moravec and Simon Harvey Wilson in WA, and myself, there's probably very few people who've published or even looked at in depth this area. And what I'm going to do tonight is briefly, for the first period, review what a few of the global researchers have said about this link or not said about this link. And I thought, because we want to get people involved in some interactive discussion about the topic, is I really need to talk at you for a little while to give you some perspective, to get questions rolling in your minds, to get a bit of dialogue going about that. So I'll talk for a little while about the historical perspective, take a break, have a look at a few areas of interest to us, a few questions, then have a look at some Australian cases that I've personally looked into, and give us a bit of a discussion based on a few things that come out there, and then look at some research findings, some sort of more formal research work that's been done, and look at what might happen in future. So, a little bit of a talk at, a bit of a break, and take it in easy segments to get us through the time. So the first section is a historical overview. The first name on the screen should be really somebody that you've heard of. And we're looking back at 1975, so we're going back almost a quarter of a century now, when French-born UFO researcher Jacques Vallée, who's had a really enormous influence on the field of ufology, wrote a book titled The Invisible College. And the book was, the title was a reference to the fact that he had a number of scientists who were interested in looking at UFOs, but they kept themselves in the background. They didn't really want their peers to know they were interested in the topic. And at this point in his life, and Jacques Vallée moved from France to California, and a lot of his research work in both countries. At this point in his life, he came to believe that the UFO phenomena really was two things. One, that it was a physical object, and yet another aspect of it suggested it was a window into another reality. So he came to a belief system that there were two things that you really need to look at. And when he was looking at theories to explain the UFO phenomena, he came to think that you couldn't put a theory forward to explain the phenomena unless it actually accounted for the reported psychic effects that came with it. He didn't want to try and explain just one aspect of it. He thought because psychic aspects and psychic reports and psychic experiences came with UFOs, you really did have to look at the whole thing together. You couldn't just take the bit that you liked, you wanted to sweep the rest under the carpet. And one of the things he came to realise was that nobody was talking about the frequency with which psychic aspects in reports came up. And a quote from him was that in recent years, and here he's talking 25 years back, that reports of paranormal events in connection with UFO close encounters had really become the rule rather than the exception. He found psychic experiences, particularly with close encounter cases, with just about everyone he talked to. If you knew the right questions to ask, you could find this out. So really 25 years ago, the leading thinker on the subject, and Jacques Vallée, I think, retired from the field a few years ago, he expressed a belief that you really needed to build a bridge between the data that were coming from parapsychologists and the information that UFO researchers were gathering, and that you really did need to look at both things together. A couple of years later, for those of you who have been interested in the UFO phenomena for many years, and some people in the room are a little bit too young for this, I suspect, because we're talking 1977, there was an organisation in America driven by two people, Coral and Jim Lorenzen. And for those who haven't heard of Coral and Jim Lorenzen, they were driving the US-based Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation, APRO. And by 1977, after 20-so years interest in the topic, they gathered enough information to publish a book about the abduction phenomena, titled, unsurprisingly, Abducted. And one of the consultants who did a lot of work for APRO was a chap called Dr. Leo Sprinkle, a psychologist. And he conducted research into a number of the relatively famous cases in the late 70s, early 80s. And he had a little bit to say about the psychic aspects of the subject. And he said that in some close encounter cases, witnesses appeared to gain heightened extrasensory perception after their experiences. Someone else who took up the same interest around about the same time was Dr. James Harder, who was a professor of engineering, but the director of research for APRO. And at a conference in 1977 in Chicago, he was bold enough to ask people there if other investigators ran across cases where they had psychic abilities being raised or talked about during abduction research. His answer was quite surprising, because when he talked to some of his colleagues, they said that although they hadn't published on this topic, of course they came across it. But what had it to do with UFOs? UFOs being extraterrestrial spacecraft. What had psychic experiences got to do with it? So, no, we don't talk or publish about it, but yes, we do come across it. This went on for quite some time, because one of the next speakers who took up the topic or area of psychic experiences to do with the phenomena was J. Allen Hynek, and he was popular. Unfortunately, the late Professor Hynek. But his view was that as an astronomer, he was really a hard scientist, but after looking at the data, particularly the American experience, he felt that what we call parapsychology, or the parapsychology things that were seen in the UFO phenomena, were really somebody else's super technology. He thought there was nothing wrong with putting forward the view that if someone else was extremely advanced beyond us, then what to us appeared to be magic, to an advanced technology might be just everyday bread and butter. And he mentioned this as way back as 1978, I think it was.
and no one wanted to know. So he was a person who'd been an Air Force consultant, US Air Force, since the, I think, mid-50s, and he was putting forward a point of view that yes, you do come across these things, maybe it was explainable in terms of somebody's technology, and no one wanted to know about the topic at that stage either. So some of the early days crept by, and it wasn't really until 1980, I think it was, where a chap called D. Scott Rogo came into the picture. He was actually an American parapsychologist. He had no interest in UFOs to start with. One of his leading interests was poltergeist phenomena, and he had a few books published on that particular topic. But then he decided to take a look at the UFO subject, and particularly the abduction phenomena took his interest. And we're talking 1979-80. We still haven't got terribly many people who were researching into abductions at this time. I doubt if anyone in Australia had ever heard of an Australian abduction case in this era, and we're talking 20 years ago. But one thing he pointed out was that in his work in talking to abduction experiences was that the individuals did not appear to be chosen at random. His observation after a period of time is that people who came forward with abduction accounts were most likely to be people who either had a long history of possessing psychic abilities, or they developed psychic abilities as a result of their abduction experience. And a quote I like is, he put it very, very bluntly by saying that being especially psychic made one UFO abduction prone. I think he said that at the time tongue-in-cheek, but as we'll see as we go through some of the material, it was fairly spot on. And that's an interesting observation for so long ago, that if you're particularly psychic, it makes you abduction prone. And why should that be? And one of the cases which contributed to his interest and statements along these lines was centered around a number of women who lived in a place called the Tujunga Canyon. Again, if you see a book around called the Tujunga Canyon Contactees, well worth getting. It's a very, very in-depth exploration of the experiences of, I think, 3 or 4 women living in the same household who all had quite intense and in-depth abduction experiences. And again, after they'd spent some time talking to the women involved here, they wrote in their book that many persons who have such experiences find themselves at the centre of psychic and UFO activity. And from their perspective, it seemed to stay with the individual. It didn't fade with time. They followed up some of these people later on. They were still experiencing the same sort of activity. And after their initial encounters, such famous abductees as Betty Hill, Charles Hickson, and a host of other people have continued to have psychic and even poltergeist visitations following their experience. And probably what's interesting to note is that here we have a parapsychologist becoming interested in UFOs, making these observations, and the UFO researchers themselves being relatively quiet about what they knew was occurring. Research was not only going on in the US, it was also going on the other side of the Atlantic, where 2 people, Jenny Randles and Peter Warrington, were busy investigating and documenting English UFO cases. And the first work that came out, or first serious work I suspect that came out of England, with a statistical and analytical review of UFO cases, was a book called UFOs: A British Viewpoint. And in it, surprisingly, they did not just look at UFO cases. They found 4 areas where UFOs and psychic phenomena overlapped. They pointed out that there were quite some parallels between reports of ghosts, with some close encounter type 3 and close encounter type 5 cases. 3 being a close encounter where there's alien entities seen, close encounter type 5, an abduction account. They also found UFO cases where poltergeist phenomena occurred. They found instances where witnesses just simply knew there was a UFO there. They may be indoors and go out and see something. They may be outdoors and be forced to look up. But they just knew that something was around. And that's the sort of intuitive sense of presence one gets in many paranormal encounters, where you just know there's something there. The hair on the back of your head stands up. You get a tingling sensation. You just know that something unusual is going on. And they found some interesting cases in Britain where that was occurring. They found episodes where there was telekinesis, objects moving by themselves. And what their work indicated that psychic abilities of some people overlap with UFO sightings. Not just any type of UFO sightings. Lights in the sky didn't have psychic experiences connected with them. It was always, in their findings, close encounter cases. We're still talking in England at this era, pre-abduction accounts. There weren't many in the UK at this stage. So we're talking about the classic daylight, metallic disc, lands, broad daylight, alien entity gets out. Those kind of cases were producing psychic after effects. And they came to think that certain individuals might have an ability to mentally manipulate energy, and actually that the UFO phenomena was a creation from human minds. This is some of their early thinking. If we move back at this stage to the US, two people called Gansbergs, I haven't got their first names, published a book which was probably the first work to have a look at abduction accounts in depth. They interviewed 9 people, and only 9 people, and came up with a book-length treatment exploring not only the sorts of things that they were encountering, but their lifestyles before and after, effects which had happened to them. And one of the main findings that they had was that they were coming across a large number of people, abduction experiences, who became psychic or psychically aware only following their encounters. And they're probably the first people to point out in such an in-depth study that they found this with just about everyone they talked to. They didn't pick people and go and interview them because they had psychic experiences connected with their UFO encounters. They were merely talking to abduction experiences, and in doing so, found out a host of paranormal aspects to their cases. And one of the most interesting ones that popped out at that stage was a chap called Carl Higdon. And he had two medical conditions. He was suffering from gout, and he was suffering from tuberculosis, TB. And after his abduction encounter, both those conditions just miraculously went away. Here was a case which, if you encountered it outside the UFO phenomena, would come down to paranormal healing. And yet, here was an instance where this had happened very shortly after an abduction encounter, a single episode. I mean, no one literally knew what to make of that. And I guess that these sort of things are buried in the literature. You won't come across them very often. And finally, in this era, we come to a chap called Ray Fowler. Now, Ray Fowler has produced about 5 books on one family in America, the Andreessen family. People come across Betty Andreessen? Yeah. Probably the most well-known case after Betty and Barney Hill, I suspect, because of the number of books that have been published on the one family, and because of Ray Fowler's determination to publish all aspects of the things that had happened to them. I'll mention them a little later because a whole host of things came out of Ray Fowler's work with the Andreessen family. Finally, we come to Australia. It was about 1981 when Mark Moravec produced an excellent combination of close to 90 Australian cases, where he found there were elements of both the paranormal and the UFO phenomena. And the sort of thing he found is in many cases there were reports of mental communications between the person who saw a UFO and what they believed to be the occupants of the object. There were lots and lots of poltergeists being reported, lots of apparitions, and Mark actually found a substantial number of cases where there were healings of various kinds. And it was around about the same time after Mark was looking at Australian events that Ray Fowler's second book came out. And he actually devoted an entire chapter to the psychic experiences of the Andreessen family. And Ray Fowler started off as a nuts and bolts person. He said categorically UFOs are extraterrestrial. There is no other explanation for what I found out. However, after his work with the Andreasen family, he came to think that there had to be something more than just the hard physical elements to the UFO phenomenon. And he came to accept that there had to be some kind of psychic component to this. And this becomes a theme time after time. People who start off looking at the hard physical evidence side of the phenomena, looking only at that aspect, come to realise that there are lots and lots of bits and pieces to it apart from that side, apart from chasing physical evidence. Again, looking at England, there was a chap called Hilary Evans, and Hilary Evans has published a number of books, fairly esoteric. Titles of his books are likely to be things like Altered States of Consciousness. What has this got to do with the UFO phenomena? Titles like that. But again, Hilary Evans came to the topic of UFOs also being a council member of the English Society for Psychical Research. And in a wide-ranging investigation into the UFO phenomena, he noted that you couldn't get away from the fact that UFO reports and UFO occupant reports involved psychic links. And he went on to say that really, in his opinion, the psychic or parapsychological links was actually the centre part of the UFO phenomena. Not somewhere on the fringe, not somewhere where people didn't talk about, or somewhere where you swept these sort of things under the rug, but actually central to the whole topic. And Evans came up with a whole list of things that he'd found in UFO reports. He found people who had premonitions that UFOs would be sighted and rush outside and have a look, and sure enough there'd be something there. He came across cases where people would report telepathic contact with UFO entities. And again, really here were prior to a lot of abduction cases. He was another person who came across lots and lots of poltergeist type incidents in his research. People who did automatic writing, apparitional manifestations, and again, lots and lots of people who reported healings involved with their UFO encounters. And a number of other people, Bernard Schwartz was a psychiatrist, one of the first psychiatrists who got interested into the topic. And instead of saying that he suspected that people who had UFO encounters were psychiatrically disturbed, he was one of the first health professionals who came back and said, no, I think there's a lot to this. And again, these psychic aspects and paranormal aspects are central to the UFO phenomena. They're not on the fringe. And he was another person who came to say that almost everyone he talked to who had a UFO close encounter also related UFO paranormal experiences. His book is absolutely riddled with accounts of poltergeists, automatic writing, healings, apparitional manifestations. And these are all people who are reporting mainstream classic UFO close encounters. So we started to get more and more coming out, people in the, perhaps the academic literature, talking about these things. Eddie Bullard, who was, or still is, a folklorist by trade, interested in the UFO phenomena, who's had a look at lots and lots of abduction cases from all over the world, noted a number of after effects which occurred post-experiences. One of his subcategories that he talked about was that of the paranormal. And after saying that, his observation was, particularly in the States, that when you came across such paranormal phenomena, it was suppressed or ignored by hardcore science UFO researchers. But what he found, looking at abductions, that too many people whose cases he looked at came across occurrences which really were in the field of parapsychology than ufology. And yet the same people were reporting abductions. So you had a group of people who'd say, yes, I have no parapsychology experiences, this is my abduction experience. Someone else would say, I've had an abduction experience with paranormal overtones. You couldn't tell them apart. And he said, we really did have to take notice that cases, abduction cases with paranormal aspects didn't, and still don't, 30 years later, appear fundamentally different from cases where there are no paranormal events. And one of the questions he posed, which I would like us to chat about is because was there any deeper meaning than coincidence to the fact that these two things were happening to the same group of people? And he came across dozens of cases of apparitional visitations, bedroom intrusions, ghost stories, poltergeist phenomena, ESP, clairvoyance, precognition. And all these things are bread and butter to parapsychologists, but they're not to UFO researchers. Bullard was looking at about 300 cases. Jenny Randalls in the UK did another global survey of about 200 global abduction events. And after reviewing the evidence, she came to, well, she actually said that the very clear incidents of paranormal experiences in the lives of abductees would actually prove to be the key to the entire phenomenon. Again, it's not on the fringe, it was the key to the mystery. Pursue the topic and the link, and you'll find the answer to the UFO phenomenon. And the reason she said that was that the paranormal incidents happening seemed to be the only things that made these individuals different from anyone else. Around about this time, 10, 12 years ago, we have professional psychologists who were starting to use research methodology to look at this very topic. A chap called Professor Kenneth Ring, who was mainly interested to start with in near-death experiences, got very interested in UFO abduction accounts. And he, together with an associate called Christopher Rosing, conducted a project called the Omega Project. And he took the true scientific method, he got a battery of questionnaires as his methodology, he applied them to groups of people who were talking about UFO experiences, another group of people who talked about near-death experiences, and two control groups who had no such experiences. And he ran a really big program which took about 2 years to do all the research work on, and then he published his findings. And one of the findings relative to our discussion tonight was that he found the UFO experiences group scored the highest on the reported incidents of childhood psychic experiences. That is, he came to the conclusion that an individual who, as an adult, reports UFOs is more likely to have had a childhood history of psychic episodes than someone who never has reported a UFO. I met Kenneth Ring when he was out in Australia giving a talk after his book came out, and it got me intrigued to talk to people in South Australia where I'm based about their own experiences. And what surprised me, in the first 5 people that I talked to in detail about their abduction experiences, 4 people had quite extensive paranormal episodes following their abduction experiences. Indeed, 2 of those 5 featured poltergeist episodes. Now, to give you some idea, because that's a pretty rare phenomena in the paranormal, to give you some idea of the number of people who report these things, in the average population, about 3 people out of 100 will at some time during their life say they have come across poltergeist experiences around themselves. So that's 3 in 100. And here was I finding 2 out of 5 people who had poltergeist experiences. And the more that I talked to people, the more I found that the incidence of that sort of paranormal happening is probably something closer to 70 or 80, 7 or 8 out of 10 people who have abduction experiences will, around about the time of their abduction experiences, have some of these very, very rare poltergeist type paranormal episodes. Ray Fowler is also at his 3rd book at this stage on the Andreessen family, and he came out with an enormous list of paranormal episodes that he had found from that family. What people realised at this stage was that it was UFO researchers that were talking and discussing this topic. And then it occurred to somebody to actually go and talk to the UFO experiences themselves and say, what about you doing some research in this area? And so an American lady, Carla Turner, decided to go out and research for herself, after a personal abduction experience, the sorts of things that other people were saying. And she went in and did a very, very in-depth collection of 8 people in the States, all female, and she found out that every single person in this particular study, and they weren't picked for this reason, picked for the fact that they had reported abduction experiences, every single person when questioned said that they had, in their own opinion, above average psychic episodes, above average psychic ability. And her view was that where this would derive from was some form of evolution of consciousness following their encounters. So that's what she thought. She formed the opinion that the encounter had some way stimulated the consciousness of these ladies, and it was leading them on an evolutionary or transpersonal journey from the experience to who knows where. What was interesting at this stage is that Hopkins, who probably is the most well-known person in the world who has published in the UFO abduction arena, starting with his work Intruders, who detailed the story of a lady called Kathy Davis, who's a pseudonym. Her real name is Debbie Jordan, and she has published under that name. His best-selling work contained no reference at all to paranormal experiences in conjunction with abductions. And yet very shortly after, when Debbie Jordan came forward and published a book herself, her book was absolutely full of lifelong generation style psychic experiences. For some reason, Bud Hopkins, for reasons best known to himself, had screened all of these and decided that the paranormal episodes did not sit well with the UFO abduction experiences and merely reported on one aspect. And nowhere in Bud's work will you find mention of the fact that most of the people he talks to have had some form of paranormal experiences. And the family, the Jordan family, their list of things would read like a classic Stephen King novel. Drops of water falling from the ceiling, names being called by invisible entities, poltergeists, apparitions, healings, you name it. The family went through it. So intertwined between the UFO encounters was a whole history of paranormal phenomena. In 1994, we had a conference which was held in Boston at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And a couple of millionaires decided to get 100 people from around the world for 5 days and lock them in a room and talk non-stop for about 15 hours a day about the abduction experience. And the people invited were researchers from various countries, lots and lots of health professionals, UFO researchers, a couple of people from the media, people like John Mack. I was invited to go from here, and we literally sat down and brainstormed the entire UFO abduction phenomena. And on about day 3, 45 hours into the presentations, I suddenly realised that no one had talked about paranormal episodes or paranormal experiences. It just didn't seem to be going to be on the agenda of such a group, and I couldn't resist the opportunity of posing the question to this group whether or not they had encountered paranormal episodes from abduction experiences. There's a bit of stunned silence because you're not supposed to talk about the two topics together, I found over a period of time. It's just not on. But a few people were bold enough to get up. And people said, yes, I've noticed it. There's a consistent thread in all the people I've interviewed. Another person said, yeah, I noticed what I would regard as a much higher percentage of psychic experiences than I would expect. Someone else got up and said, yes, I confirm that's also been my experience in working with abductees. I've noticed this kind of ability seems to heighten tremendously after an encounter. And a very well-known abduction researcher, whose name I won't mention, got up and said, yeah, I'll certainly agree. There's been a multitude of paranormal effects, psychic experiences, poltergeists, microwaves. Had this person ever mentioned this in any of their work? And the answer was no. So in a closed session, fortunately this got into the proceedings, but in a closed session, my fellow colleagues were quite willing to admit that they had come across lots and lots of instances where this was occurring, and the question that nobody was wanting to answer was the fact that there had to therefore be some link. What was that link? And no one was willing to put the time into researching it. So this was 1994, 6 years ago. Jenny Randles was there from the UK. As I said, we have a mutual fan club going, so she got up and talked about paranormal experiences in the UK, which was very nice to get supported. And in her estimation, she reckoned that about 50%, half the people she talked to, who when you got to know them and they were willing to open up about more intimate details of their experiences, would come across and say they have certainly had lots of paranormal experiences. And interestingly, time and time again, this business of poltergeist phenomena, which are a classic paranormal thing, nothing to do with UFOs, one is told, keeps coming up. A person will have an abduction experience within a few hours, there'll be an outburst of rappings, voice calling, things moving around, things disappearing, things appearing, all of which are classic paranormal episodes. And Jenny came to think that, again, as per her earlier comments, that this was really the key to the UFO phenomenon. It's what made abductees different from other people. They not only had UFO encounters, but as children they grew up in life immersed within a sea of supernatural happenings. One of her most famous quotes is, "It was if the paranormal was the day-to-day life for some people. They didn't know anything else. When they talked about it, they found it quite peculiar that other people were not living in the same pattern." And then as adults, they came to UFO close encounters. Now, John Mack, 1994 again. 94 was a very good vintage for people starting to talk about this particular thing. John Mack presented in his book Abduction the work of a Brazilian researcher. See, unfortunately, most of the stuff that I was able to find comes from either the US or the UK. Very little in the European literature I could find. Very little in the Brazilian literature. But the Brazilian researcher, who is a psychologist named Gilda Moura, said, yeah, I come across it the whole time. I come across the fact that this is quite normal for abduction experiences in Brazil to have telepathic abilities, clairvoyance, visions, the receiving of messages, normally things you'd associate with the paranormal. Has anyone heard of Alfred Budden? This will be a good test. He's an English researcher who's actually come up with the idea that close encounters are inherently linked to electromagnetic radiation, not coming from outside the Earth, but the sort that we pump out. He's written a couple of books now with the hypothesis that the close encounter experience is actually an event generated by the human mind, combined with natural and artificial electromagnetic energies. And his two books are just full of interviews with experiences from the UK. And one of his comments is that it's become almost a cliche to report that these people have got a history of psychic experiences. Same sort of thing we've talked about. Ray Fowler pops up again in '95 with his fourth book. If you want to sit down, I think his books now will be about from there to there. It'll probably take about 2 weeks to read them. Very detailed. And at that point on his fourth book, he said that he received 1,000 letters from readers of previous works. And of those that reported to him about abduction experiences, he didn't actually say a percentage, but just that many were confronted by the paraphysical nature of the UFO phenomenon. I did a bit more work in Australia and conducted a methodological survey, questionnaire survey of 54 people that I'd come across who had experiences in Australia. And one of the things buried amongst a range of questions, of maybe 80 questions, were three that are relevant to tonight. There were statements that people had to rate as whether or not they thought it applied to them. And one was, I feel I am more psychic than before the event. And an amazing 89%, almost 9 out of 10 people agreed with that statement. To the statement that I feel I can heal other people, almost 1/3 said, yes, that's true of me since my abduction experience. And almost 6 out of 10 said that, yes, I agree with the statement that since my abduction experience I feel that I've become telepathic. Quite high percentages compared to what you'd expect to find from interviewing the average person. And finally, the most recent work I could find in the literature comes back to Mark Moravec, who lives down in Victoria. And in volume 6 of an English journal, a fairly scholarly one called the 14 Studies, Mark had produced an update of his work of almost 20 years ago, looking at Australian cases. And he concluded by saying that he felt that the UFO phenomena, or the psychic or paranormal aspects of the UFO phenomena, are actually, in his opinion, an established part of the enduring UFO.
Accompanying them to the journey to the next world. Well, next slide, please. I believe it is because one of the visiting star races, not too accurately drawn by the picture of the figure at the upper left there, the scales are far too large there. They should be very fine scales, such as you could hardly see, sort of like the fine scaling on the belly of a chenolian or a snake. This is one of the races that made contact with Earth and helped primitive humankind develop in a very short order high elements of civilization, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, and knowledge of spirituality, and knowledge of origin of life from the stars. What you see before you here is David Chase, a talented artist in Washington State. He tried to depict the various kinds of races that people who've had encounters have described to him. He, of course, is working with the handicap of not having actually seen these individuals himself, but depending on people's descriptions and trying to do the best job possible of drawing them as accurately as possible. You will see in this assemblage some fairly familiar figures, some of the Zeta Reticulan folks, so-called grays, although they come in many skin colors and many eye configurations, actually. Some very human-looking folks that you put a pair of sunglasses on them, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them from somebody else walking down the street. And other figures who look quite different from us. The short gray dwarf types, the wrinkled skin, the reptilian type I mentioned, humanoid. Not depicted there as a praying mantis type, insectoid, humanoid, very spiritual and ethereal species, and so forth, many others. These are just some of the more common visitors to people, is my estimation from working with over 400 experiencers, that there are perhaps 100 races in contact with Earth. I draw my information from not only my own work, but working with hundreds of other therapists who work with people who've had encounters, and other researchers such as Dr. Leo Sprinkle, retired psychology professor from the University of Wyoming, Dr. John Mack, active psychiatry professor at Harvard University, etc. Thank you. I believe that's the end of the visuals. Afterwards, if you would like to see additional depictions of some of the visitors, including a couple of actual photos, I'd be happy to share them. I just don't happen to have them in PowerPoint format at this point in time. My apologies for that. I'm going to give you a presentation that will hopefully not insult your intelligence, and will assume that many of the people here have done a lot of background self-education, reading, and attending lectures. I'm not going to waste a minute of your time trying to prove UFO reality In my view, anybody who doesn't understand UFO reality doesn't have an operating TV set. There have been far too many documentaries presented on the subject. I'm not even going to spend a huge amount of time on the star visitors. Because other speakers have and will, over the next day, make various presentations on that subject. I will tell you that there is a great deal of disinformation and misinformation on the subject being put out in the popular UFO press and on the media. In my research experience and that of the behavioral science professionals that I work with, the vast majority of those visiting here are interested in our best welfare, and tales of abusive invaders are largely the work of science fiction. I like to tell the story that if I were in a dark alley late at night and walking down there and there was a figure approaching from the other end of the dark alley, I would much prefer it to be a star visitor than a human. My odds of keeping my hide in one piece would be much better. What is going on now is another iteration of the unfoldment of contact of the visitors with us. I'm going to give you shared email communication back and forth between myself and the mother of a star kid, and then I'm going to use that as a springboard to give you an historical perspective on what's been going on with the human race. And then we're going to jump back forward to the immediate now and the very near future as we look with some detail at the next iteration of human evolution, human advancement forward. It's not really evolution. As Dr. Lear suggested, it's aided by some genetic engineering. We are on the dawn of amazing times as we become a cosmic society. There is a sleeping phenomenon among us that you hardly ever hear about in the media, but you will be hearing more and more about. Let me just share this letter from a mother of a star kid. She talks as follows. My daughter will be 18 next month. I've never doubted her exceptional qualities. I've never found anyone else who is like her. She keeps a low profile on these matters. I think as she moves into adulthood, she will be working with other star children. I won't go into great length about why I feel she's a star child at this point, but let me just give you a hint or two of who she is. She was talking at 4 months of age, conducting fluent conversation by age 2, reading by age 1, seeming to be an old soul in a baby's body. Even at her birth, there were interesting dynamics. Her crib was covered by a beam of light in the nursery. And let me have a young woman, starseed, tell you something she wrote me about herself. I had written on the internet the various qualities I noticed in these kids, and she wrote back, I have all the powers you mentioned, some more strongly than others. Some I don't have control over. I seem to have the least control of telekinesis, the ability to move an object by focused mental effort. It seems to occur at random and when I am upset, and can occur at a pretty good distance from me. Before I knew I had the power, I did some damage. Got angry once at a business some years ago, dreamed about it burning down, and later it did. I can sometimes not be seen by people. I am still visible, I just have a way of not being noticed if I don't want to, mental influencing of others. I have not levitated to my awareness since I was an infant. She's apologizing for not levitating anymore, but she used to. And then she goes on to say how that was found out. I was found on the floor beside my crib with no obvious way out. I was too big to get through the bars and too young at 8 weeks old to climb out of a standard baby bed. So my dad pretended to be asleep one night to see how I was getting out. He claims he saw me float out in my sleep from the crib, turn over in the air, and the turning over would wake me up, and then I would fall with a bang to the floor and start crying, which is how they've been finding me night after night for weeks after hearing the thud when I hit the floor. I wish I could still do that, but I can't turn those psychotronic twirler things you make out of paper and stuff. What she's talking about there is a kind of very thin paper pinwheel suspended on a fine pin with a bell jar put over it so that not a whisper of air can get at the apparatus. Some of you may have seen a video or documentary that made the rounds on some television called Russian Psychics, which actually showed this on film, another person doing the same thing. The person sits there and focuses at the little paper pinwheel captured inside the glass stone, and after a while it starts to spin by pure mental effort. The star seed goes on to say, I can feel other people's emotions. I can see into gift packages, so my husband made a great game of wrapping gifts for me. He has learned the one way to beat me is to disassemble things and wrap them separately. That way she can't see what she's getting for Christmas. I use dowsing. I can see auras and I can read them. I do psychic health readings. I have an IQ off the scale, which makes people so mad at me that to keep friends I try so hard to pretend to be dumber than I am. But that gets to be a strain after a while. Remote viewing, that's the ability to sit here and see what's going on somewhere else at a distance, is and has always been a parent-child's play to me. I'm a physical empath, feel others. I can do mental influencing. Mental abilities is in the forefront of the head. All of a sudden we emerge as a species with those characteristics. How did this happen? Well, we don't have to guess. It turns out there are multiple sources of information to answer this question. All the indigenous peoples of the world, the Native Americans in North, Central, and South America, the Aborigines here in Australia, the Maori in New Zealand, Aotearoa, the Dogon in Africa, the Dropa in China, all the indigenous people who have an unbroken record of memory of their oral history back to the beginning tell the same general story of origin due to people from the stars. Besides these handed down oral histories, the first written history in Sumeria, modern Iraq, going back some 6,000-7,000 years, was decoded by Zecharia Sitchin, whom some of you have read his books. These people, among other things in their ancient chronicles, told of their origin, that they were visited by people from the stars who taught them astronomy, mathematics, medicine, architecture, crop rotation, the ability to tell planting seasons by when the sun and the moon are at certain positions in the sky, and of course written writing. Sumerian culture is the first example of writing in the human history. Where did they get these abilities? These are people who before were wandering about, nomadic hunter-gatherers trying to find tonight's dinner on the prowl, and all of a sudden, and essentially overnight in archaeological terms, they settled down in a fertile valley built not just buildings, but multi-storied cities, 2 and 3 stories high, with crude but effective observatories, water works, all the trappings of civilization. Did they suddenly take a smart pill? Not exactly. They had visitors from the sky show them the elements of basic culture and civilization. On the other side of the world, the people in Mesoamerica, the Mayans and the Aztec, talk about sky visitors whom they call Quetzalcoatl and Cochabamba, who came down and showed them the same elements of civilization, and all of a sudden we see emerging from the jungles multi-story cities and giant pyramids and observatories. And again, civilizations essentially blossoming overnight. The star visitors didn't just genetically engineer Homo sapiens by taking primate stock and splicing some of their own genes in for intelligence and dexterity and greater cranial mass, brain case size. Over the millennia, they watched over our development to see how this species would turn out, because there's never been another planet Earth, and the primates that evolved here to a point that they were developed enough that with a little splicing they would make an intelligent species. We were built for the gravity of Earth and all that, but you never know with a given planet and a given evolutionary species, when you go in and splice for intelligence, what's going to happen, what they're going to do with that intelligence, how they're going to evolve, how they're going to culturally evolve. And so over the millennia, they watched our development. And we moved forward as a species, but there were still certain limitations. And so as they saw that too much of the aggressiveness of the animal side of our makeup still showed through, we settled arguments by putting a stone axe in the other guy's forehead. They decided to send teachers among us to help us raise our cultural, spiritual, mental development. A Lakota Sioux medicine man, teacher, elder of the Sioux Nation, looks for buffalo, made a very striking statement at a gathering in the plains of North America several years ago. This gentleman shared some of the... I used to make people get off the freeway to go to the bathroom just to clear traffic when I was young. I would look at the back of their heads, imagine what it was like to really have to go bad to the bathroom, and beam this feeling at the back of their heads, and sure enough, they would get off the freeway. Try and find the nearest bathroom, I presume. I can sense storms, and I can sometimes ride them. Out-of-body traveling is a random thing I don't have much control over. I get psychic answers to tests. By that she means she just knows the answer without studying the subject. This drives parents crazy when their kids do this. And I know a lot of subjects I've never studied. I can heal others, but I have a poor track record with self-healing. I have the psychic scent. I can track people like a bloodhound. I can smell things like death. Once I smelled death when a man was having a heart attack across the street from my house. I can't define what it smells like. I study synesthesia in search of things, the answers to these things. I don't think I've ever put out streetlights. I mention that because one of the things I've listed in the categories I've noticed with experiencers and starseeds are kids, especially those amber sodium vapor street lamps that are around kind of a yellowish orangish with a glowing inside gas inside. One of the things I've noticed with the starseed is that when they go by, they will sometimes go out. not every time, but way more than random. And it appears that what's happening is the bioelectric field around these star folks has been so amped up that it swamps the plasma field that keeps these lamps going, and they collapse, and there's nothing left but the little tiny filament wire glowing, but the big glowing gas field has collapsed, and therefore it looks like the streetlight has gone out. She goes on to say, I can bring nearly dead plants back to life. I can calm down storms so they're not so damaging. I have an extra vertebra, lower the normal body temperature. By that she's talking about one of the characteristics I've noted in this population, that their body temperature is a degree or two below the average. You'll have to forgive me, I'll give you the Fahrenheit, you can do your own centigrade conversions. In the Fahrenheit world, 98.6 is considered the average human body temperature. That's what they set fever thermometers to tell you you're normal. Most of the star kids and star seeds are below 97.6. Some of us have readings like 96.8 instead of 98.6. I have all kinds of advanced ideas that no one will ever listen to. People like us could make a wonderful difference if society would just let us. We know ways to create a utopian society, ways to make a machine that can heal and reverse aging. But the way things are in this society, I'm just a crackpot. I've learned to use a computer as a remote viewing amplifier only recently. And so those are some of the things she wished to share in her letter to me. These are amazing abilities. In the general human population, there's a vague awareness that once in a while you run across a human being who's psychic, meaning maybe they have a very good intuitive sense of what somebody else is thinking. Or perhaps they can see the future. But to have 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 of these abilities, that is unheard of. And yet with these star kids and star seeds, that is what is happening. How did this come to be? To put this in proper context, let me give you a very brief journey, a revised history of the human race. 350,000 years ago, approximately, Homo sapiens emerged all of a sudden without any direct ancestors. We know that the archaeologists speak about Lucy and some of the other primitive primate skeletal remains discovered in Africa. But these do not bear a direct resemblance to modern humans who suddenly emerged. Even Neanderthal, the closest species to ourselves, has been studied through DNA testing and found out to be not an ancestor of humans. And they were, of course, much more primitive. We do not have that caved-in, sloping skull front. We have a bulging forward forehead. We know that the location of intelligence and ESP, higher that is a cover sheet from a CIA secret file drawer. It's the kind of thing you see, unfortunately, applied far too often to this subject. We're going to get rid of that cover sheet and go into a depth that goes frankly beyond a lot of what military and intelligence understand about the subject. Next slide, please. That is just a brief organizational chart of the intelligence apparatus, part of it in the United States. There's more on there. that is so classified that it isn't even allowed to be acknowledged to be part of the government, but it is. The next slide, please. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the military intelligence defense UFO cover-up complex. You will notice elements like the National Security Agency, or areas you perhaps have not heard about, Star Wars City in Colorado Springs, where the complex of bases where they conduct control of the United States Space War Command. The organization is prepared to conduct a full-scale space war at any moment. And we're not talking about Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles. Elements like Roswell, Martin Marietta, and Lockheed, Boeing, and some of the other defense contractors, and ones you may not be quite as familiar with, Rockefeller Company, and some of the other books at the trough. Okay, next slide. This is a photograph of a low-level UFO, can't be more than 300 feet, probably a lot lower, above the jungle floor in Matamoros near the Mexico-U.S. border. People say there's no clear daytime photos close-up of structured metallic craft. I would beg to differ. This is a blow-up of that. Next slide, please. It's flying upside down there. That's a failure of the slide, not of navigation. This is the right side up version of that. And next slide, please. People say, when are they going to land on the White House lawn? Well, the visitors have many forms of communication, and I think it's a statement of their mental elegance and respect for our intelligence that they engage in quiet dialogue in various kinds. Crop circles, the genuine ones, represent such an effort at communication. This rather complex one, showing the double helix strain, is actually made up of, I believe, close to 71 individual circles woven in a pattern. This appeared overnight in a grain field in UK, and I can assure you, Doug and Dave had nothing to do with it. The next slide, please. An even more intricate communication method, suggesting that we understand the chaos theory, and the people who know chaos theory know about the Mandelbrot set, the rather pattern of uniformity and organization at the edge of apparent chaotic edges of matter when you render it under a microscope at a high enough magnification level. First it looks chaotic, and then you start to see patterns of organization with it, and below the Mandelbrot set is the Julia set. It's interesting that in the swirls of chaos, organization appears signs of intelligence to the very subatomic most level of matter. Thank you. Next. This figurine is from a very old civilization. 9,000 BC, the glaciers receded from northern Europe and Turkey, and as they receded with the last of the late Ice Age, cultures sprung up, including in northern Turkey, where 35 underground cities emerged, the most famous being Derienku. These cities house as many as 20,000 inhabitants. You wonder where people who had just emerged wandering from the ice ages suddenly sprung up into fully developed cities with multi-storied apartments, houses or dwellings all of a sudden. The figurine you see before you is found in the graves of the inhabitants of the city. No self-respecting citizen would go to their grave without making sure such a figure appeared in the grave with them. Why were they so concerned for having this figure